How does it feel to be the most
The
handsome,
most handsome man in all of well. I've had a face for radio my whole life, so
Oh, don't say that, Dave.
I hope people listen to the audio content.
I've like tried to describe. I mean, I don't do it all the time, but when I do, paint the picture of where I was and the iguana, and if you pop up because it's kind of painting the high definition image. The best maybe, and obviously this is a single linear thing. It's like he's kind of the ultimate backpacker who never wanted to leave the hostel, so he married the chick who had the hostel.
There you go.
Is that?
Well, I think Deedle and I both backpacked a lot before we settled down here. With a passion for both of us. She was an anthropology student, and she spent tons of time in Indonesia and just taking trips all around, all over the place. And I think the Brits have more of a history of, you know, inhabiting all corners of the world like that. But me as a young American, I took my first trip really abroad when I was 18. I had a high school chemistry teacher who was amazing, Jack Hawkins, who ended up, I found out later, got California Teacher of the Year 1 year, which is pretty huge because California is like a country unto itself. Yeah. But this guy spoke all these different languages, was head of the swim team, the water polo team. He had a travel agency on the side of being a teacher for organic and biochemistry and physiology. He had a doctor's degree from Mexico somewhere. He was just the most fascinating man I'll probably meet in my life, and is still around. He's not teaching anymore. He's retired in California.
I need to get him on the pod.
But I went. He took a group to Europe every summer.
Okay.
And he knew all the hotels. He knew all the restaurants. He knew all the museums. He knew like how to do a walking tour of a city and get your most out of it in one day. And so I did this, we called it like the Blitzkrieg tour of Europe. I looked back, I still kept the itinerary of the trip, and it was like 58 days. And we went through most of the countries in Western Europe and saw most of the highlights in the museums and the ruins, the cafes, the restaurants, the culture, the everything there. And the travel bug bit hard then, because I came back home after that. And that was after my senior year in high school. And I was in Southern California, and then I ended up going to UCLA after that. So I was at a big university, a little bit lost, not knowing what to do, but I always had this travel thing in me. And so even before I graduated from college, I managed to take a couple more trips abroad.
Okay.
And then after I graduated, all I really wanted to do was just like get the highest paying jobs that I could get short term to save up money to go and travel.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like a bit of a kind of revolutionary, mind blown, wide open 58 days then.
Oh, it was, I mean, this guy, I talked to my old high school friends still, and everybody's like, he was just another level human being. To have a teacher like that in your life, you're lucky, I think, if you have one teacher like that in your life. Yeah. And I took a few of this guy's classes, and then I actually ended up working for him privately out of his home, because he ran a travel agency out of his home as well. And then I went on his Europe trip. So I was very close with Jack. It was very funny too, because you're supposed to call him Mr. Hawkins, but everyone just called him Jack. Like all of his swimmers, all of his, it was like the second largest swim team in the US as well that he was coach of. He had kids go on to do the Olympics. He taught German. He taught just all these different subjects. And he would, in a very strange way, he would leave the classroom lecturing in a very loud, booming voice. And he would walk out in the hallway, and everyone had to take frantic notes while he was like going through really complex matters of like organic and biochemistry and stuff like that. And he would be lecturing out loud, and you'd just be writing everything down. And then he would leave the room and keep talking. And you just like kept writing down and
until he was out of earshot.
And for the exams, you were allowed to have like a cheat sheet, as much as you could fit on one sheet of paper, both sides. So you had all these formulas and stuff written down on there. And afterwards, I went to UCLA. I never, ever had a class even remotely as challenging as his honors chemistry class in high school. It was like this level of education that was just beyond anything I ever got at university.
Honestly, you don't fucking hear about that too much from the US either. Like,
no,
it sounds like.
No, the science department was really strong in the high school I went to, and I was really into that. And then when I did get into college, I was weeded out by most of China, who sent their best and brightest young sons to UCLA to come and study. And I wanted, like, I was out of the house for the first time. I wanted to have parties. I wanted to, meet people, and my competition in these science classes was like the best and brightest out of China.
Get A's or you're coming back to communism.
And I, needless to say, sort of got into a different thing and ended up getting a psychology degree in the end. So
yeah, good old psychology,
which has helped me to be a bartender in various parts of the world. And
all right, before we because that was already like a beautiful little skeleton timeline. I also know very little, and not that I should know a lot, but I think the few little brief glimpses I've got of your like growing up in the States, everything you've mentioned reminds me of that 70s show. Not that you're that old, like, but it's like this kind of teenagers running. But that is kind of the like reverse, where you're in a very nice sounding private school or whatever. I don't know what it was.
No. It wasn't a private school. It was state. I never went to any private schools. I went to, I was very lucky to grow up. So both my parents are from the Rocky Mountains area. They're from Idaho. Potato country. Yeah, well done. Your knowledge of the States is deep.
It's getting there.
It's a beautiful area, and it's historically not been super populous or popular. It's like a hidden gem. Kind of not a lot of people know about it.
Boise.
Yeah, okay.
Boise, Idaho. Very good reviews.
Yeah. It's, there's so many different beautiful areas in Idaho. But my dad, one of the first PhDs in chemistry from the University of Idaho, he was a chemical engineer. And so he wanted to go where the jobs were. So he ended up getting offered a job in New Jersey, so other side of the country. So I grew up my first 14 years in New Jersey because that's where Dad had a job. And but both my parents always wanted to get back out west. And so eventually he got a job offer in Southern California, and that's why we ended up there, closer to Idaho and the family up in the Northwest. But yeah, I benefited from a very good New Jersey public education in the 1970s. It was
so it was 70. Okay.
It was the 70s. I was born in 1970.
Yeah.
But the education in the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut area back then was just in the public schools, like the regular old, bog standard schools, was a really, really high level of education. And so when I moved out to California, they were like, oh, my parents were like, oh, can we enroll him in courses in Latin and in, whatever.
The public schools, they don't.
And in Southern California, they were like, sorry, we don't offer that here. But so they ended up shoving, I entered in like third year math classes in my first year, in my freshman year in high school, because I had gotten such a kick-ass education back east that when I came out there to Southern California, they shoved me in. They didn't quite know what to do with me in the beginning, and so they put me in all these honors classes and stuff like that. And so yeah, that was like laying the groundwork. And then looking back, I probably shouldn't have gone to a huge university like UCLA, but I wanted to go to the best university I got into.
Sure.
And I applied like kids do when they're 17, 18 in the States to apply to all these different universities. And then you pick the best one that you get into and you go to that one. Well, it was like 40,000 students. And I was like, I've always felt more, small towny kind of, more whatever, but.
Sure. Well, I know you now, and I've seen you only in the last few years since knowing you, and you're very personal, very extrovert, outgoing, and probably more importantly, because of worldly is probably the only suitable adjective that allows you to connect with all sorts of people, whether it be Indigenous Guatemalans who've never left within 2 miles of where they were born, to, the president's people or whatever it is, right? So it's like a broad spectrum of people you're able to connect to. Was that always the case even growing up? Was from being in New Jersey there, or were you more of a misfit,
Well, I suppose because my parents moved us around a little bit. I moved once when we were in New Jersey from one town to another town. And then I moved to Southern California at a really critical age in development, I suppose. I mean, I was at that awkward age of like early teenage years.
13, 14.
When all you want to do is fit in. And here I was, this kid from like the sticks in New Jersey coming to like cool Southern California. And so there was this real desire to fit in all the time.
And you didn't have long blonde hair at this point?
I didn't know. Like my friends in high school still joke about the fact that like I arrived with like cut off shorts. So like jeans that were like cut off with like the frayed, sort of. And I had I think I had a rock shirt that was from Twisted Sister, this band back in you'll have to look them up online before your time. But I just got teased mercilessly. And I never felt like I fit into Southern California. The kids were just like, it was all about like being cool, and nobody did cool like Southern Californians did cool.
And it's that very much like my image of that is laid back, smoking weed, surfing cool, like naturalistic cool almost, versus maybe cool in New Jersey is going to like bunkers, underground bands or some weird. It's
Yeah,
both cool.
in New Jersey, people would go out in the middle of a cornfield and have a party, like,
really?
you know, well, the area that I lived in, more rural New Jersey, the kids would like bring a bottle of something and go out to the middle of the cornfield away from their parents and like, you know, sit there and get drunk in the middle of the cornfield and shoot BB guns at each other and stuff like that we used to do back there. And we had the one pump rule. So you were only allowed to pump the BB gun once,
Okay.
but like no face protection. No, we could have
So
easily
it's just a bit weaker.
gone blind. Yeah. So you get a good sting and you scream a little bit, but you know,
Okay.
and you know, sneaking cigarettes and whatever, and then I come out to Southern California and it's like everybody was either like a surfer or a punk and we didn't even live in a beach community in Orange County, California. We were inland in like a little bit more boring area of Southern California, but everybody was still. You either were a surfer or you had to dress like a surfer or pretend you were a surfer and there were like all these brands that people had to wear. And I was so out of my element that, you know, but trying to fit in again. And so I suppose having that desire to fit in, I learned I was like the class clown all the time. I was like, you know, cracking jokes, and just trying to make friends that way through sort of humor and whatever. I did a couple of plays when I was in high school as well.
Eric mentioned this, that you were a theatre
and
kid.
I enjoyed doing theater-y type stuff. And
I saw
I was small, so I was definitely not one of the jocks. I was not a football player. I was not a basketball player. I was always one of the smaller kids in the class. So I was like, you know, trying to find my angle. I've always gotten along with like theater people and music people and stuff like that too. But meanwhile, I had a father who was a chemical engineer, and it was always like science. And I did enjoy science as well because I had this great teacher in high school as well. So yeah, but relating to people from around the world, well, not from around the world, but necessarily, but from various backgrounds, I suppose probably came from that being moved around and wanting to fit in kind of thing. And just like, you know, cracking jokes, making friends as and when I could. And then
is there any joke that you reckon from an open mic night at the Iguana here that you reckon has survived all those decades since high school classes?
Oh God, I don't even remember like specific jokes from high school. I just remember joking around.
Yeah.
You know, teasing, you know, making fun of yourself, like self-deprecating humor or you know, I can't even remember specific jokes.
It's interesting though, because it sounds, a lot of people I think that end up in places like this lake are usually on at least some level got to be deemed as quote unquote interesting individuals.
Oh, we used to get the edges of the bell curve here in Guatemala all the time. And that's one thing I loved about the country is the nut jobs that you would get coming in here that were just like these seasoned travelers. And it's changed over the years, and I lament it with some of my friends too, who have lived here for years, that now we're getting like rolly bag people from Middle America. It used to be like,
how have you got a suitcase all the way here to the Lake Guatemala?
Yeah, exactly. And they're like rolling, and again, you're like not knocking. You know, we need a world full of diverse people, and thank God everybody's not like me and wants to be a nut job and go and move to the other side of the planet and do all this other stuff. But you know, when you scope people out and you meet people at the bar, do you want to talk to the person who's like, oh, I'm an accountant from Kansas? Or do you want to talk to the person who's like, you know, I don't know, I hunt badgers in Malawi and I, you know, and it's just like, wow, I've never heard of anybody there's badgers in Malawi.
Yeah.
So
it's like an infinite podcast guest kind of, without the camera, like, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, the people, they used to say Panajachel here on the lake was full of the wanted and the unwanted, because it was like either you were cast out of your family or you were wanted by the DEA or the FBI or somebody, you know, number of people that were getting picked up for being narcos, for being, you know, whatever, and that were on the run and just had these amazing stories. And you knew that whatever name they were going by wasn't really their name. It was like some other name. I know a couple of different people who got picked up here by the feds who were like, well, one guy's funeral, it was great. We went to Oaxaca Bob's funeral, and my friend Sid held that funeral. Sid, who used to be known as Phil, because of other charges and things, but it was at this place over in Panajachel, and at the funeral, he's like, "Well, thank you all for coming today to Bob's funeral. If there's one thing that can be said now, it's his name wasn't Bob." and and he had been living down here, on the run from the law his whole life, but there were just these characters, who lived here, and Guatemala's become deemed a more safer mainstream place to come in recent years, and so we're getting people from more diverse backgrounds, and it's great for tourism in Guatemala. But I still harken back to those early years, just full of weirdos and nut jobs and runaways and
it kind of makes me
outlaws.
think, like, has the world just got less of them now? Which is probably true, because it's probably harder to be like that with the internet and stuff, and passport biometrics and whatnot. But also, it's like, have they just moved somewhere else, deeper into the world? To the Malawis themselves, or to the Guyana, which was a weird place I was just in, and it's like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that you'll find still people in little remote corners of the world, mostly British, mostly
French.
French. Yeah.
It's always the old colonizers. They like have it in their blood. They want to be
exactly. There's some weird little pockets here in Guatemala that have got some very odd French people living in them as well. But no, I think because of when I was born in 70 as well, I'm kind of on the border of a couple different generations, but a lot of those original backpacking hippies who went and discovered the world are still out there roaming around. They're just older and crusty now and living in wherever, but it was the hippies who went and discovered a lot of the places now that have got 5-star resorts in them. And they went through their evolution. They were discovered by the hippies, who then got in touch with their friends and said, you got to come here to, like, Goa in India, for example. Oh, you got to come here. It's so beautiful. They would send postcards to their friends. Their friends would then arrive. They would be living, in a little mud hut somewhere. But then as they got older, maybe they had money, or somebody else, realized that this was a popular place to be. They came and they built small hotels. A few years later, the small hotels were replaced by bigger hotels. And now there's like 5-star places. And that brings us into the discussion about the very interesting discussion about the nature of tourism as well, and what it does to places around the world, because there might be a place that has an incredibly rich culture, and then you saturate it too much with tourists who are there to experience that culture, and it kills the local culture, and it also makes it less interesting from a touristic point of view, because tourists always want the authentic.
Right.
And after too many tourists go there, it no longer becomes authentic.
And you kind of see it sway towards, okay, we're not coming here because of the authentic culture, but there's still all the infrastructure for you to come here. So now you're coming here to escape the 9 to 5 and have cheap cocktails in a foreign country.
Which is why so many tourist locations become so homogenous as well these days. White sand beaches in Mexico, the Mayan Riviera, they call it, or whatever. I like to go to the beach, but I definitely don't want this place, or I don't really appreciate as much just places with little palapas and cheap cocktails and white sand beaches. You can find those anywhere. I want more culture than that, which is why I fell in love with Guatemala, I think, in the beginning as well, is because it's such a living culture. It's such an active living culture. And
they're still I always say this, they're still speaking that, like, even though it feels like now, as you say, most of the world is kind of over commercialized and homogenized itself in those cool places, at least what I see and feel, and you can definitely come to the lake and just stay in the bloody Salina and Pana and just have that fucking pristine little thing and catch the shuttles everywhere and whatever. My judgy side can come out if I start talking along that line.
Yeah.
But they're still speaking bloody Mayan language to each other. The women, at least, are still wearing traditional clothes that a lot of them were bloody handmade on the loom.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like, fuck yeah.
Have you seen this video on YouTube? It's hilarious. It's called Guatemala, Also a Place.
Okay, no, I haven't seen it.
So there's a Guatemalan actor who's a fairly famous Guatemalan actor. He was in the Mexican Narcos version, but he did this really funny video comparing Guatemala to Costa Rica. And saying Guatemala, it's also a place. He's like, Costa Rica, sure, they've got beaches and they've got monkeys and they've got whatever. You want monkeys? We got monkeys here in Guatemala. You want beaches? We got beaches. We got jungle, whatever. But it's a hilarious video, and you can find it on YouTube. It's called Guatemala, Also a Place.
Oh, yeah, that's brilliant.
But it's like, if you take an example of someplace like Costa Rica, it's it's historically had so much more fame because they disbanded their military years ago. They concentrated all their money on tourism, and they did a great job of it. They made their place safe, and then there's the perception and reality issue as well. But their country is perceived and is a very safe place to go and visit, and that's what, if you say Central America to most Americans anyway, they instantly think, oh, fear, danger, narcos, whatever. And Costa Rica was the exception to that. Costa Rica, and I would argue Belize as well, because Belize was a British protectorate and colony and whatever. That
it's not technically Latin America.
Yeah, that people felt safe going to those countries, whereas every other country in Central America they were scared of. But you go to Costa Rica, sure, they've got beautiful beaches, they've got beautiful jungles. You can go and see the birds and you can see the monkeys. But there isn't a living culture there.
No.
And in Guatemala, it's like the highland Mayan indigenous culture is so rich, and there are so many aspects to it. And Guatemala is like 6 or 7 countries in one too. I mean, you're in this part of Antigua, Lake Atitlan, Shela, the highland culture. But then you go down to the coast on one side and it's completely different. You go down to the coast on the other side and it's completely different again. You've got the Rio Dulce, you've got Alta Verapaz, you've got all that area up in the Coban, you've got, places that a lot of tourists don't go to, like up by Huehuetenango and San Marcos, up by Mexico, where there's these little microclimates and there are these different people up there.
Ted just sent me a photo in the street with he was dressed in a full Guatemalan clown costume with this bloke in like the middle of some town in Huehuetenango region. I was like, fuck yeah.
Of course, and there's still, even after years of being here, it's still, I haven't seen as much as I want to see. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned exploring Guatemala. And we've skipped a few steps, so we'll bring it back eventually. But I know you have like a campana, like I believe it's like a shitbox Jeep or something.
Yeah.
And you're always running around the hotel and you're always busy and whatnot. But how much of Guatemala have you been able to explore, and what have you seen? And I mean, you probably said a lot of it just then, but I have this image of just having my own car, because there's such a clear tourist trail of like these 5 points, and people catch shuttles between them and stay in their hostels. I have this image of having a car like yours and just going around for a few weeks and just getting absolutely lost.
So much fun to dig deeper, because in Guatemala, the 3 main tourist attractions historically have been Antigua, which is a UNESCO protected heritage site, which is like the Disneyland version of Guatemala. Sure. A safe place for people to arrive to. Everybody speaks English. But then Tikal, where the Mayan ruins are, and then here, Lake Atitlan, just for the natural beauty and the volcanoes and everything else. And to dig deeper than that, you've got like 1 layer deeper than that.
El Paredon.
Which is El Paredon, Samuk Champey, which a lot of people go to these days with the waterfalls and stuff, which they didn't back in the beginning when I was here, and nobody could get there. It was an English friend of ours, Matt, who went and opened up the first hostel up there, really, and kind of put it on the map. It was called, I'll think of the name in a minute. El Retiro, I want to say.
That's maybe where my mom and I stayed on the river.
But Matt opened that up, and then a couple of workers of his opened up Zephyr, and then it's turned into a bigger spot. But then twice I've had the opportunity to go with a friend of ours, Ian, who was author of The Rough Guide and Lonely Planet for sort of Central America and Guatemala back in the day. And he used to come here and visit back early days when we had no electricity here, no hot water, and it was kerosene lamps, and we'd sit around telling stories and this and that, and we befriended him. And then Inguat used to give him a car and a driver back in the day. Inguat, the Guatemalan tourist, board, kind of Ministry of Tourism. And then they got stingy over the years and they didn't want to give him a car anymore. So he would hit up my wife and be like, hey, Deedle, I'm coming, I really want to go and see more stuff. How about Dave comes with me and we take his car and we go drive around, and like he gets the boys, week off for whatever. So Deedle will be looking after the kids, looking after the hotel, and I got to, go fuck off with the inn and go take off to wherever. And we did one big trip with him down to Rio Dulce in that area. And then the second trip I did with him was up to the Cuchamatanes, these mountains here in Guatemala where not many tourists go to.
Where are they?
And so it's, if you go to Chichicastenango from here, which is the market town, you keep going on that road north
towards the border,
and there's a big mountain range, and the mountain range is called the Cuchamatanes, and it's like up toward the Mexican border. And there are all these amazing towns up there that are higher altitude than here, still very rich indigenous culture. There's Todos Santos, where all the hot pink stripy pants come from, and they have the famous drunken horse races once a year on Day of the Dead, where people just get shit drunk and they ride these horses, and it's bad luck for the crops if nobody dies in the horse race that year. So they're like, yeah, great race, but nobody died, so we'll see how the crops do this year.
Do you have any idea of like, do people regularly die most
years?
Yeah,
historically, people have died there before, fall off, break their neck, whatever. They get like stupid drunk and then they jump on really fast horses. And then but there's Todos Santos, there's Nebak, Akul, and Shahul, these towns that were really affected by the war as well, that are up in that area.
Mayans are famous for like human sacrifice and stuff. That's the right way to do human sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's like,
you sacrifice it yourself. You take the risk yourself. You're not harming anyone else. You're like, I'm going to do some really stupid shit right now. And if I die, then,
the gods are happy.
I'll be returned to the earth and the gods will be happy, kind of thing. I agree. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
That's so good.
But
So that's where the military went in and...
Because, well, yeah, up in that area, there's an area called the Ixil that's up there where some of the worst travesties of the Guatemalan Civil War, which lasted more than 30 years, happened up in that area. But they're just really culturally beautiful, rich areas, and so few tourists go and visit there that as a white face walking through some of these villages, you still just get stared at, and you hear people whispering like "gringo," whatever, and like pointing kind of thing. But and the little kids especially are so cute. They want to come up and like, touch your hair or your skin or something like that and be like, I've never touched white skin before. Does it feel different?
Yeah.
But it's because we haven't been tourists here and we've been working pretty much the whole time I've been in Guatemala. I've been working, and I've had 2 kids that were born here. And so we've always wanted to spend time with our kids, spend time with our family, and we have had to spend time at work as well. And then whenever we would take a vacation, because my wife's English and I'm from the States and we live in a third country, a lot of our vacations would be family, going back to see family, going up to the States to go and see my parents, my sister, my aunts and uncles up there, going to the UK to go and see my wife's immense family, cousins, everybody all over the place from Scotland all the way down to the south. So we haven't had as much time as I would have liked, but we have definitely made efforts to make within Guatemala vacations. Both of my kids still have never been to Tikal.
What?
I think Theo may have gone on his last trip here. Gabriel even was traveling as a backpacker with his English friends when they came back from school, and they went through up there and they breezed right by Tikal and didn't even go there. I think they stayed in Flores even, and they didn't go to Tikal. So, and I know.
But you're telling me about
but they have been to like really more obscure places. They've been down to, been down the Rio Dulce. We went on a Mirador hike, which is seeing the Mayan ruins up in the jungle by the Mexican border.
That's like going way past Tikal to basically the border.
It's the most dense jungle that you can ever imagine in your life. It's full on Indiana Jones type stuff. Yeah. It's really funny.
I did it in dry season, so it was actually chill as.
Oh, no, we went on the back end of a hurricane.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And we also did 10 days instead of just the standard thing. And we went with the archaeologists, which again, if you've got local knowledge and local friends, we went with these guys and we did off-trail stuff. And the whole first day we were hiking in water that was above our knees. And my kids were like 12 and 14. And they were ready to collapse at the end of the first day. And we got out of there and just, we were like, there were points on that trip when my wife and I were going, was this really the wisest thing to bring our family into this atmosphere? There's snakes that if they bite you, you can be dead within a minute. There's mosquitoes all over the place. There's God knows what kind of disease and danger and everything happening. But it was amazing. And it was a formative trip for the kids as well. And so that was great. And we've done... They both got, because my wife was a dive instructor, she taught me how to dive when I first met her. She was like, well, if you're going to be with me, you're going to dive, boy. So she taught me how to dive here. And then I got up to dive master level eventually and was able to be like a working diver here out of the dive shop for a number of years. And then when the boys were of age, both of them definitely got certified. And so now what we love to do as a family is do dive holidays together too.
That makes sense.
And there's still, even though the quality of scuba diving is declining everywhere around the world, there's still... We want to desperately try to get in as much cool diving as we can while it's still around.
For sure.
So, nothing.
And then you'll just swap to free dive.
Exactly. There you go. If I could only equalize upside down.
You haven't done it in Australia.
Damn you. That's a good point.
Comes to the reef.
Yeah. But I've been to some pretty cool places. Now there's still spots in Guatemala that I haven't been to that I would love to go to, but it's hard to even think of what they are right now. I've never been to like these caves where you can go tubing. They're called the Cuevas de Candelaria.
Okay.
And they're up in like Alta Verapaz, Baja Verapaz area.
That's like
and again, the French. I hear one of the main guys who runs the tubing thing up there is this crazy old French guy who settled there years ago and has bought stuff up there. And I've got an old friend from Antigua who also lives up there and I think does some of that. So I'd have to look him up and see. But
it's really, I've never even thought about, because I've been young and I haven't been going around for that long. I think I have, but I haven't. Like, to have witnessed the reality of tourism on a global scale and to go to places like here, which would have been just completely raw. And now it's basically nothing like that exists. Like, I mean, where can you go like that?
Well, there's an idea that I read about years ago about what they call shifting baselines in your experience and what you expect. And I read about it actually in a dive publication. They were talking about scuba diving and how it's been honestly getting worse everywhere around the world because of ocean temperatures and, coral reef bleaching and stuff like that. But me as a diver, my first experiences with coral reefs are my baseline. That's what I understand as my baseline. And then 20 years later, I could go back to the same spot and it's worse. But if I go back to the same spot and I bring my kids with me, that's their first experience with it. They're still like eyes wide open. Wow, this is so amazing. This is great. And there's nothing more annoying than a backpacker who goes, you should have seen it 20 years ago. You're just like, you know what? Fuck off. Let me have a good time. This is my holiday. I'm enjoying it. This is great. This is, I'm loving it the way it is now. I mean, somebody older than that backpacker could come to him and go, oh, you should have seen it 20 years before that.
Sure.
I mean, the world is changing and it's globalization is a thing. I mean, so many more people travel than they used to. Even in like the national parks in the States that I used to go to, I could rock up to any national park in the state with my tent in my old pickup truck and just pitch up anywhere and camp and whatever.
Now you
got to make reservations. You've got to there's like all this rules and regulations and stuff. And it didn't used to be that way. Is it still beautiful? Yes, it's still incredibly beautiful. It's still, Guatemala is still incredibly beautiful and it's got so much to offer, but it has changed over the years and it has had that thing with more tourists coming, which affects the local population and affects the authenticity of the experience from the perspective of the tourist as well.
I think I see in myself and some of my friends, kind of lamenting the fact that we weren't born 50 years ago and couldn't experience that. But then equally, and that can sometimes come with judgment of like the kind of people who are, Guatemala is great. So I'm like, but it wasn't like, you can get that, or you can go, as you say, like you can just take it for what it is and be like, oh, this is amazing. And if I want to, I can just take myself way off the trail and probably find something similar to 50 years ago.
And you definitely can.
Have you found, like, just for purely how to do that, I guess, like advice or tips, you mentioned kids. Would having kids be the main thing that's helped you in accessing that perspective that, okay, my baseline just has to change now, the best? Or is there other things? Have you actively thought about this, or just...
As far as accessing cooler, more remote areas and
stuff? But what I mean is, okay, this is a question I would probably have asked you later, but we're here, right? I remember coming to the Iguana and context, I came and I wanted to start a freediving school and you guys, more or less were like, you can kind of like rent the wetsuits.
More or less, we're still not sold on you.
Yeah, exactly. More or less, be kind of a parasite on the but within 3 months, I distinctly remember, because I was doing the chicken on the barbecue on a Saturday night, right? I was vegetarian at the time, so whatever. And
damn good chicken, by the way.
Oh,
you're a good cook.
The local boys seem to enjoy it a lot. So. So I was cooking the chicken and I was flipping other things, and I'd probably done it 5 weeks in a row at this point. And then I'd already hosted open mic, I think twice when you were away and Alex was away. And I'd said the dinner speech a bunch of times, and I basically I've done the yoga class. I've done everything that the Iguana has, for responsibility wise, other than kind of doing the books and the accounting and stuff. And I was like, I've kind of, in my own way, completed the iguana in 3 months. And I'm like, so it's a natural thing of like, okay, what next, you know? And I was like, hang on, I've been here 3 months. Dave's been here 25 odd years. He's been here 100 times longer than me. Yet he's still, at that point, saying jokes and bringing energy to the open mic and still getting around and still even just showing up and not being just a jaded, old, prickly cunt. And I was like, how is that possible?
Well,
That's my big question.
okay, so like, how do musicians do it? Like, you know, I'm a musician myself too, and I write, you know, the number of times that I've, you know, had to sing the Chicken Bus song at the Iguana. How does Mick Jagger get on stage and keep playing, you know, Satisfaction or something like that? Does it give him satisfaction to play Satisfaction, you know? And the thing is, you feed off the crowd. And if you see smiling faces and happy people, you know, I work in tourism. My job is making people happy. And what a great job, you know, and what an easy job in a beautiful place like Guatemala too, working in an industry like tourism, that your responsibility is to just to make people happy, which they already are because they're away from their shitty job back home, or maybe their wonderful job back home. They're in the sunshine, they're in a beautiful country. And to meet their expectations isn't all that difficult. And to exceed their expectations with a little bit of extra effort is even better. And so I'm fascinated by meeting new people too. And sometimes I'm not. And it's great to be able to get away. You know, it's really important for us to have had our family here and to be able to get away. I know other people who have gotten completely burned out being in tourism because they are there all day, every day with the tourists. Maybe they're like a single guy who runs a hotel. And so he wakes up in the morning and is like, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down and start working and whatever. And for us, we've valued the time with our family. We've valued the time when we get away. We get away from here at least a couple of times a year to go and visit our families back in the UK or back in the States. We've got a house, very importantly. We used to live in the middle of the Iguana, in the middle of the hotel when it was just my wife and I. And then when we decided to have kids, we decided it probably wouldn't be a good idea for babies and backpackers to be under the same roof as each other. So we built a house. Yeah. So we built a house just behind here. So my commute is a 2-minute walk, but it's that space that allows us to be able to get away. And then when I can come down here, every time I'm down here, I'm on kind of. So I used to work, let's go back to my history for a second.
Yeah, please.
When I was 16 and I had moved out to Southern California and I'd been there for, you know, a couple of years already, I got my first real job at Disneyland.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a crappy old car that my dad, it was still my dad's car, but like I could use it because he had his real car. So this was like this car that was put aside that my dad was like giving to me. Knowing,
so the old phone, if I need it as a spare, I'll use it.
But it's also going to teach you how to fix cars.
Oh, okay.
Because if it breaks down, you're going to fix it.
That's the engineering mind.
And, you know, so I learned a bit about fixing cars and stuff like that. But it was like a 20-minute to a half an hour drive from where my parents lived in Orange County or where we all lived to get to Disneyland. And I realized that you could work there as a teenager, and they hired lots of teenagers as there for whatever. So I was like, this kid from New Jersey going, wait a minute, I can work at Disneyland and I can make some money doing this. So I applied there and I ended up bussing tables at Carnation Restaurant on Main Street for minimum wage, which back then was like $3.85 an hour or something like that. And I had an amazing time. You know, the best time was like, you know, when you shut down after you finish washing all the dishes, cleaning the restaurant, and then you walk out onto Main Street, Disneyland, and it's dark and it's midnight and there's nobody there. And you're like, I'm alone on Main Street in Disneyland at midnight. And you're just looking up and down going, wow, how many people get a chance to do this kind of thing, you know? At 16, wide-eyed, you know, and so it was the program that they put you through in training at Disneyland. They used to call it like Disney University or something like that. Okay. And it taught you, it was pretty intense. It was like 2 days or something that you would do, but it was very intense. But I distinctly remember learning there that they said anywhere on Disneyland property, when you were visible by anybody who was a tourist, you were on stage, quote unquote.
Okay.
And so if you were ever in the public eye, you were on stage. Didn't matter if you were a busboy or it didn't matter if you were in costume and you were playing Mickey Mouse, you were on stage. And so you would put on a smile, you would act in a certain way, you would be dressed in a certain way. And they were very strict about that. And your behavior had to be so and
Then
so.
one of the it's modern day video of Mickey Mouse, I think, taking a piss behind the building. Like,
yeah. But I always have kept that in my head, and having worked there at a young age too, and in a restaurant environment, I suppose that was an invaluable experience for me, running a restaurant like we do now, but just working in tourism. I mean, whenever I can be a grumpy old man up in my house and I can be doing whatever, but when I come down here to the Iguana, and I'm not faking it. I try to be excited about being here. I try to make the guests excited about being here. I have something in me that wants to make people happy. And maybe again, that goes back to childhood and moving around and being the kid who's like moving into the new area and just wanting to get a laugh out of people when I crack jokes, or wanting to get a smile out of people or something like that.
Yeah.
But I really do genuinely enjoy making people happy. And so whenever I come down here, even if I've played the song a million times before, I'll play it again because it's a new crowd and I can see the smiles and the people who haven't heard it before and the people who whatever. So I still get satisfaction out of playing Satisfaction, maybe. I don't know if Mick does, but
I really like that.
But it's fun to, and you have the same conversations too. Hey, why are you coming to Guatemala? How long are you here for? Where are you from? And we put specifically in the front of our little menu our story years ago.
Yeah.
I copied that idea off of our friend David, who had the Posada Santiago here on the lake for years too, because he had his story at the beginning of his menu, and I thought this would save us so much time in answering the questions over and over and over if we just had this printed out. But still, you meet people who go, "Oh, you own this place. Oh, how did you start it? Oh, what? Tell me your story," kind of thing. And
then they want to do a podcast. And you're like, fuck
I know. Next thing you know, you're, sitting there in the sun and bullshitting, telling people your story. Rusty, who
Yeah, I know Rusty. Yeah,
he did one for a restaurant that he had down in the Rio Dulce before he opened up here on the beach in El Paradon. He had a restaurant down in Rio Dulce, at a hotel. And he made up this complete story at the beginning of his menu. He was like, I used to be in the circus and I ran, and then, I ran away from home, and then I was kidnapped by people, and then I ended up whatever, and now I'm here in
Rio Dulce. They're the home of, that's where the cons are now. Have you heard of like McAfee?
Oh, yeah. No, his story was between there and Guatemala City. It's where he got arrested in Guatemala City.
Yeah, that's right.
Where he finally got arrested. And he may be still alive.
Really?
We don't know.
Oh, wow. Okay. That was a wild one. Because I remember reading this. For some reason, I heard this John McAfee do. I was like, oh, yeah, McAfee antivirus. And he was like, Orange Walk Town in Belize. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember hitchhiking there. It was terrible. I didn't get a ride.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's murdered his neighbor. Oh, okay, that's interesting. He's like found in Rio Dulce because he was on a Zoom.
And he was making like biopharmaceuticals in the jungle in Belize. And then he like killed his neighbor's dogs. And then the neighbor may have, and then like it was all this weird... Yeah.
And then he got caught because he was like on a Zoom and they saw the background was like this cafe. I was like, hang on, I remember Ted and I looking around Rio Dulce for 2 days trying to buy a kayak, and we were in that restaurant and like
Cool. But Rio Dulce is where we helped catch a pedophile one time. The guy he was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, and there was a guy who was staying here who, it was back in the days of those rigid 3¼ inch discs that were for computers. So originally we had the floppy disks, which were like the big ones like this. And then they moved to like these smaller hard disks that you would insert in a computer to save information on. And this guy was in an internet cafe in Antigua, which there were very few of back then. And he needed to get a disc. And somebody said, oh, well, there was that old fat American guy over here. I think he left a bunch of discs in the drawer in there. You can take one of those. And he takes things out, and he finds these disgusting pictures on these discs. And he's like, who the hell was this guy?
Yeah.
Because there's like pedophilia pictures on these discs and whatever. And they're like, oh, I think he's still here in Antigua. We know who he is. So this guy tries to reach out to like the embassy here in Guatemala. He doesn't have any success. Eventually he reaches out like directly to the FBI. He's like, hey, I think this guy's here in Guatemala. Make a long story short, FBI comes down, grabs a hold of this guy, arrests him, and he was one of the top 10 wanted for pedophilia for years.
Whoa.
But this was the end of the road for a lot of the people, and the end of the road used to be Panajachel, and that's why so many people dropped out there. But then Pana became more and more popular. Rio Dulce That's where you find a lot of the real scumbags these days.
Yeah.
There's some great people living there too. Don't get me wrong. There's some like sailors and stuff like that who
But I
come
mean,
in.
the town has a highway with like huge semi-trailers just bursting through it. And
Oh,
you're
it was
like, what
built.
the
It was
hell?
built on prostitution as well, because I mean, it was where like the sailors and the truckers would come through there, and it like grew up with like this atmosphere of being, and it's the original home of the Pirates of the Caribbean
Right,
as
exactly,
well.
literally.
If you float down that river, you'll find graffiti from like the 1700s up on the wall, still up
Yeah,
there
on
from
the
like
cliff.
these pirates, because it's been a safe haven for ships forever. So if you were out on the Caribbean in storm season, you would bring your boat up the Rio Dulce and you would moor it in there for the hurricane
Cayo
season, and then you could
Camado
go back out again. But it was where the Tarzan movies were filmed in the early 1930s with Johnny Weissmuller and swinging from the vines and stuff like that. They filmed that in the Rio Dulce in Guatemala, and so it's got this amazing history in that part down there too.
One of my friends was telling me, I don't know who this was. I think it was like a backpacker dude I was talking to, and I was telling him about, you know, Ted, who was just here when he was here a few years ago. We went to Rio Dulce. We eventually bought this like 50-year-old wooden pirogue fishing canoe, which had about 2 inches off the water, like thing. And we kayaked it out with like a stick connected to like, I don't even know what they were, like paddle, like homemade rubber paddles or something. And we're just going out like bloody idiots. But it was cool. It was manatees and stuff popping up. And then we ended up rocking up to this dock in Cayo Camado, one of like, you kind of almost at Livingston. And we pull up to this dock at like sunset. And there's this German lady living on a sailboat there. And she's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? She just straight up did not believe us basically the whole time that we kayaked there in this boat, because there was a tiny bit of chop in the El Golfete there.
Yeah.
And it almost sunk us. I was bailing full time. And
classic.
It was very funny.
So Deedle used to have a boat down there years ago. She had a 62-foot trimaran that she
ask you
bought
about that,
into with her. So when she started the Iguana, because it was she who started the Iguana, I was living in Antigua. I came here to teach English, to be able to finally figure out how I could live abroad, because I had this travel bug that kept biting. Every time I went back to the States, I was like, I got to get out of here. How am I going to get out of here this time? I'm gonna get another job. I'm gonna save some more money, and I'm gonna go abroad.
How old were you when you came to Antigua?
I was 28 when I moved to Antigua.
Oh, so this has been a decade of like in and out kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I graduated from university in 92, 93, and I moved down here in 98.
Okay.
So there were 5 years of me like in the States, getting a job, traveling again, getting a job, traveling again.
And never a psychologist.
Never a psychologist. Got slightly involved in the Southern California illicit agricultural activities for a little while.
Just shopping stuff?
No, I was more on the growing end of things.
Okay.
I was into that whole scene for a little while.
And that
worked for a department store up in Seattle in their offices, making money. I worked the number of temp jobs that I had that were just like realizing what I didn't want to do with my life as well.
Sure. Like office desk jobs.
Yeah. I could go and sign up for like a temporary agency somewhere, and they would shove me into an office, and I could work for a few months, make some decent money, and go and travel again.
So real quick, because we're here, and I didn't know how we would bring it back, but I'm glad you have. Now, you kind of laid out the fabric of your mind currently, and probably the last few decades while being in Guatemala and having a family and all that stuff, and the way you interact with yourself and the world. But in that, say, 5 years, I'm sure you're having a lot of fun in uni and whatnot. In that 5 years of really, I think every young, especially man, but like woman as well would be just as relevant. But I certainly feel like as being like a young man, it's almost like there's a sense of usually urgency, desperation. I don't know how much it plays in on each individual. Of like, where's my place in this world? In this society, in the world, like in myself, how do I feel like not just like strong and capable, but like how do I feel useful and like good to people and in some sense deserving of friendships and relationships and whatnot. I probably feel that a bit more intensely than most, but can you take yourself back to the fabric of your mind and what you were thinking about and what kind of anxieties and directions and directionless maybe like you just kind of floated through
and you use the word like sense of place, and I know you meant that in more of a metaphorical way, but also a physical sense of place.
For sure.
So
what physical place is going to represent
I
that?
mostly did stuff in my life because it was the right thing to do, and I was being a good boy, kind of, get good grades in school. Okay, gotta get the best grades I can so I can get into the best university I can. I get into the best university, totally changed when I was in university. I got very political. I grew my hair out, started smoking weed.
Oh, becoming Southern California.
All of a sudden became a Southern California guy. I was back in the first Gulf Wars, which were going on, and so I was there with
my own Vietnam.
with
Yes,
my
finally.
like no blood for oil signs in the streets and stuff like that. And I was and I got a bit radicalized in college. Who was it who said, like, if you're not a liberal in your 20s, then you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative in your 40s, then you have no brain?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know who it was, but it stands true.
So,
To some extent.
anyway, I graduated from there, and I wanted to get out of Southern California. I was kind of sick of it. So I moved up to Seattle. And I had a friend who was up there, and I lived up there for about 1.5 years. And then I saved up more money working in this sort of boring office job. I took a trip then through, where did I travel to then? Through South America. And then came back to the States, and found myself in LA again. And I rocked up with my backpack, and I knew that my buddy had not only a job, but a house. And so I went to his place in West Hollywood, threw my backpack behind his bushes until he got home from work. And then I was like, hey, surprise, I'm here. Can I crash on your couch? And do you know where I can get a job? Because I got no money, I got no place to stay, kind of thing. And by then, my parents had moved as well to Texas, because my dad was offered in the oil industry, like, if you work for 2 more years, we'll raise your retirement benefits to this, but we're going to move you to Texas. Okay. And he looked at my mother, and my mother was like, I'll do anything for 2 years. That's fine. So they moved to Texas. And so all of a sudden I was without that base of my parents being in Southern California. And you got to remember, I wasn't from Southern California to begin with. Even when I grew up in New Jersey, I knew that I wasn't from there because my parents were both from Idaho.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's the sense of space as a human being, meaning what do you want to do in life? But there's also the physical reality of being rooted in a place. And I never really had that. I never really had like a hometown.
For sure.
Because always in New Jersey growing up, it was always like, oh, well, we're going to be moving. So sometime we're going to go out west. And, the holidays we're out west to go and see the family out there, maybe and then eventually we did move out to Southern California. And then I moved to Seattle. And then my parents moved to Texas. And I found myself back in Southern California again. And that was really, I think, when I probably started going, all right, what the heck? Where am I going to live? What am I going to do?
Okay. This moment
parents are in Texas. Don't know. They're going to retire in a couple of years. Don't know where they're going to go. My sister, I think at that point, did live up in Seattle or Portland. She was up in the Northwest. She got out of Southern California as well. Here I am in my early 20s in Southern California, working odd jobs, basically just desperate to travel. And, graduated with this psychology degree, didn't want to become a psychologist basically because I didn't want to deal with people's problems for the rest of my life. What do I want to do? Get this job. Okay, I don't want to do that. Work at another temp job someplace. Okay, I desperately don't want to be in an office someplace under fluorescent lights. I enjoy working with people, being with people. Had this wacky fun time in Southern California, getting into the weed thing for a while. Yeah. And then I took off on another trip.
Was that the closest to like, oh, this is maybe 70% of the way there?
Well, it was fun, but it was illegal.
Sure.
And I mean, and I always was like paranoid. Remember, I was like a good kid who always wanted to like, be good, do good, whatever. And there I was being illegal.
So you can kind of track the thing of like, obviously the end destination we all know now, spoiler alert, is Guatemala, Hostel. But it's like, you can kind of track this like weird zigzag kind of ricocheting. Yeah. And maybe.
So I really did feel on my own in Southern California for the first time, but there was an excitement in that too. Mm. You're young, you're like, hey, I'm a, God,
independent.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a dangerous age when you feel like you're so mature and you know everything. Yeah. And then looking back in retrospect, you're like, I knew nothing.
I'm scared of that feeling within myself because I feel that strong.
Well, and I think I was probably conscious of it at the time as well. I've always been attracted to people who are a little bit older than me, and I've tried to learn from them. So even at the time, I knew, hold on, check yourself. Like, I know that I'll have that perspective when I do get older as well. So, don't be too cocky kind of thing. But I fell in with these guys who were buddies of mine from UCLA and other people. Next thing you know, we're like like getting into comedy clubs, music clubs, cutting to the front of the line because one of my roommates was, selling the weed to all these guys that I was growing, that our other friend was, we were living in like a mansion in like the Miracle Mile area of LA that was actually owned by the district attorney of LA. We had like a guest house with a hot tub.
That's
We
quite
were
funny.
getting into comedy clubs, and so I loved going to the comedy clubs, especially. We'd like go there, we'd walk in the door and they'd be like, these same comedians had been over at my house scoring weed earlier that day. And now here we were at the club and like,
I wonder if like the likes of like Rogan and shit, would that have been the same time? Like,
oh, there were all sorts of,
LA
there were some pretty big famous comedians then who would drop by our house, and like famous actors and people like that as well, who would just like drop in, and all of a sudden you'd open the door and you'd be like, oh, hey. So we never sold out of our house.
No.
But like these guys would come by to visit every now and then, or we'd like, we weren't stupid enough to, again, it was illegal. We didn't want to get caught. But I had a job in the movie studio that my buddy got me so my buddy who put me up when I first rocked up with my backpack, he was working at a movie studio, a post-production studio. So I had like a real job for him. And then I had this other job. And eventually I left the real job with him and I just started doing this other stuff instead.
So is this your taste as close as you've got probably to like the high life? Like making
it was
the big
a
city?
rock and roll lifestyle. It was so much fun because I was like, I was going out camping and hiking all the time. I was, indoor gardening and I lived right around the corner from Los Angeles County Museum too. So I had that other part of me that had like traveled around Europe that was like, I'm really interested in culture and things like that too. So I would, on a Sunday morning, I would go over to the Los Angeles County Museum and they would have free classical concerts in the museum on a Sunday morning. And these people from all over the world, and they'd have different exhibitions and you could wander around the museum and, sip on your latte and whatever. And then I come back home and
I'm
then
sophisticated indoor grower.
But then that night, like a buddy had called me up from like, a record label guy who I knew would call me up. Like, hey Dave, what are you doing tonight? I'm like, I don't know. What am I doing tonight? Well, I got front row seats for the Jane's Addiction concert. And I'd be like, all right, that's what I'm doing tonight. And he, and we'd go to that. And then we'd go to, the House of Blues and I'd get backstage passes to do whatever. So it was definitely, there was like this rock and roll lifestyle moment that I had there. But always with this base level of paranoia that like, I don't want to go to jail. What am I doing?
Sure.
Like,
and how long and at what age was that period?
That was like 94, 95, 96.
Okay.
And then I left to go on so with some of the profits that I made, stacks of $20 bills laying around the house, I bought a bedroom set, I remember, for the house that we were living in. I bought a used car. It was a nice car, and I paid for a trip to Southeast Asia. And I wanted to go to Thailand.
Okay.
And I'd always wanted to go to Thailand, and so I packed up. I told my guys, "Hey, shutting down the grow operation for a couple of months. I need to go abroad. I'll grow a whole bunch. You guys harvest it. I'll be gone for a little while." I took off. I was sitting on the beach in Thailand and having a fantastic time touring all around there. I then saw a thing on a travel agency and it was like a flight to Kathmandu for, whatever. And I was like, ooh, Nepal. I was like, wow, that'd be cool. And I was really fit back then. I was hiking, I was rock climbing. And so I caught this flight to Nepal without telling my parents even back in the day. I mean, this was back in the day of postcards. There wasn't really internet. And didn't even bother to send a postcard to my parents, just jumped on a flight to Kathmandu and I signed myself up with these crazy Aussies who I met on the plane from Thailand to Kathmandu. I met these Aussies on the plane and they're like, well, we're going to do this 22-day trek. That's the Annapurna circuit. And I was like, can I go with you guys? And they were like, yeah, sure, come along. Mate. So, there was this guy named Warren who was Waza. And there were these really fun guys. And I hooked up with them and we did this 22-day trek. We did it in like 19 days. We were blazing. We did this fantastic hike all up past Annapurna 1 and 2. And we did the whole Annapurna circuit. We came back down the other side. We got back. We relaxed for a couple of days, came back to Kathmandu, flew back to Thailand eventually. And then I'm on board this flight flying back to LA. And I'll never forget. I get on and they're like, it's like this video on the screen of like Tom Jones going, "Ain't it wonderful to be loved by anyone?" And I'm going, this is so cheesy. What are they playing like this weird music for? And then they start like pouring out Johnny Walker whiskey to everyone. And I was like, okay, that's cool. I'll have a whiskey and, you know, get some sleep or something like that. But then I was just thinking, I was in this weird culture shock, having just been in the Himalayas with like namaste and people like bowing to you on the trail. And it was a very spiritual like journey as well. I mean, it was just you felt the spirituality in the area of all these monks and just this beautiful outdoors. The sky, I've never seen a bluer sky in my life than on that trek. And I was, you know, the adrenaline of just, you know, getting your body in that shape and doing something physical in the outdoors like that. And then I'm on a plane listening to Tom Jones, drinking Johnny Walker, and I'm headed back to Los Angeles. And I just went, nope. I was like, there was like this click in my brain. I went, something's got to change.
Where's the parachute?
Something's got to change. I'm out of here. I arrived back in LA. I like break the news to my guys who I was sharing this mansion with. I'm like, can't do it anymore, guys. Sorry. I'm out. I'm going to go do something. And I had read in the back of a Rolling Stone magazine, again, this is pre-internet days, they had this advertisement in the back of a Rolling Stone magazine of like, get certified to teach English in San Francisco in this school. It was called New World Teachers. And I was like, that's what I want to do. That way I can have this skill under my belt and I can go and live abroad for a while.
Go anywhere.
So my parents then had quit the thing in Texas. They were retiring up into Oregon. I packed up my car in Southern California, say goodbye to the people there. I drive up to Oregon, settle in with my folks up there. And I had written off and sent a check or whatever to this place in San Francisco to sign up. Spent a couple of months with my folks up in Oregon, helping my dad finish off a deck on their new house that they had just got into up there. Spent some great time with my folks. And then off to San Francisco, where I had a good friend who I crashed on her couch in the North Beach area in San Francisco. I did this teaching program. I was obviously good at it because they offered me a job at the school in San Francisco to like not go abroad, but to stay there and like teach teachers. And I was like, no, dude, the idea of me doing this was like I get this certificate and then go away. But it was a teacher at that school who recommended Guatemala to me.
Okay.
And he said, you should go there. There's opportunities to teach English. You'll have a great time. I buy a plane ticket. I fly into Guatemala and I land in Guatemala City. And it's dry outside, and it's you know, new town. It's sort of late at night. I get a shuttle to Antigua, 45 minutes away. It's pouring down rain, and I find the closest hotel that I can find, and it's this weird place under the arch in Antigua, and because it was so pouring down rain as well, I blew my budget. I had like this idea of like how much I was going to spend every day, and it was going to be really cheap. This place was like, you know, $30 a night, which was like way beyond what I wanted to spend, you know?
Sure.
But I was like, okay, first night, just suck it up. And I remember lying in the bed there and just going, I'm going to go back to the airport and get back on a plane and leave because I don't know what I've done. Here I am in Guatemala. I don't speak any Spanish. What have I done? I'm supposed to get a job teaching English. Pouring down rain outside. I know nothing about this country. Maybe I should just, with my tail between my legs, just go back to the airport, get back on a plane and just get the hell out of here. I woke up the next day, it's still pouring down rain. It was Hurricane Mitch, which was this big, significant hurricane that hit Central America back then. I arrived on Halloween of 98. And this hurricane took about 10 days to go away. It basically parked on top of Guatemala.
Wow.
And it just wouldn't move. And so the devastation was pretty profound in Guatemala. El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras all suffered a lot of damage from this. So, but at night, first night, I'm like, where's the local bar to go and hang out in? So I find myself at this bar, and there's a few other, and this was again back in the days of like the crazy expats, a lot of nutty people that were there. But Guatemalan peace accords had been signed in 96, ending a more than 30-year civil war. So the country was then open to tourism for the first time, really. You could come before then, but you were coming to a country that had an active war going on. But then the peace accords had been signed. And it was full of Danish people and Dutch people for some reason. And it was like they only chose like the hottest ones were allowed in as well. So like I'm in this bar, it's full of like hot Scandinavian girls. And I'm just going, where the hell am I? And so I sort of let it slip at the bar in the first couple of days that I not only had worked at a bar before in LA for a while, but I had actually managed a pretty big bar. And they were like, great, you're a manager, you're hired. Yeah. And so I started managing like the biggest bar in Antigua in like my first week being there. One of the bartenders there gave me a place to live. I was then paying a lot cheaper rent. I settled in. I started to like fall in love with Antigua and the culture there. And it was like it felt like being in like this like revolutionary place at the time too, because this hurricane had happened, and I helped set up a volunteer organization for like a temp organization for volunteers in Guatemala back then. We'd identify what their skills were and then put them where they were needed in the country.
Okay.
And we started collecting medicines and stuff like that needed to be shipped off to different areas, identifying houses that needed to be dug out that had totally flooded, because the river in Antigua, the Rio Pensativo, had overflowed as well. So you first start as close as you can at home. We were in Antigua, so we were trying to do stuff there. And then we realized that there were places way further out in Guatemala that were way worse damaged. And so then we're going out there and trying to help do this and that. Meanwhile, started managing this bar. We're having these meetings at night in the bar with people like standing up on tables going, all right, who's got food? Who's got medicine? Where are we going? What are we doing? We need a team that's going to go to there.
All these
We've got
people
another
are
team that's gonna go to
severely
there.
attractive Danish and Dutch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All hot. It was like, I was like a B actor in like a main film of A-listers, but I was managing this bar, which was so much fun. And then I had somebody approach me one day and they're like, hey, do you want to be a play in the community theater? I'm like, no, I don't speak any Spanish. And they're like, no, that's okay. You don't need to. It's in English. I was like, oh, all right. I've run out of excuses. Sure, I'll be in your play. And then I started acting in the community theater. I'm doing volunteer work. I'm managing a bar. Somebody else who I met in the play then asked me if I would help manage her restaurant as well. So I start doing that. And I was then teaching English in like 3 different schools as well.
Wow.
So I was like the busiest guy in Antigua. And I was like, what was I worried about? There's like no shortage of jobs here, even if you don't speak Spanish. There's so much fun here. And there's like this great group of like super interesting people from all around the world that are congregated here. And then I rented a house and I was living in this house for a while. And then I ended up living in like 3 or 4 different houses in Antigua. But about 6 months into my stay in Antigua, after doing all this crazy, fun, amazing stuff, and started writing songs for the first time ever as well. I came to Guatemala with my guitar, but I couldn't sing and play guitar at the same time. It was like the juggling and, rubbing your belly and patting your head kind of thing. So I sat in this hotel during the hurricane, this cheap hotel that I found on my second night.
Perfect.
Found the cheapest hotel in Antigua on my second night. And it was called the Posada Ruiz Dos. And I was staying there. Shout out to the Posada Ruiz Dos. And lamina roof, this, corrugated iron roof. And this rain chucking it down. It sounded like an elephant was pissing on my roof all night long. It was just really chucking it down. But I sat inside with the guitar and I taught myself how to sort of sing and play at the same time. I was like, okay, I could do like a Dylan song. I could do like a whatever. I started, practicing a little bit. And then not shortly after that, I wrote the Chicken Bus song. I was just like, brilliant. This is kind of, fun.
So that was when it was all pretty fresh. Like you hadn't been here for 10 years and fully soaked it in.
No, and I barely spoke any Spanish. And then I remember one night at the bar, the power had gone out and the owner of the bar was like, hey, Dave, go get that guitar of yours and come back and entertain the people. And I was like, I only know a couple of songs. He's like, doesn't matter, And I was writing, so I was living with this guy, Drew, who then became my best buddy for years. He eventually set up Earth Lodge outside of Antigua. But Drew worked here at the Iguana as well. And Drew and I lived together, and Drew was like my muse. He would be like, hey, let's write a song about this. Hey, let's get drunk and write a song about that.
What was the other one?
Sweet Marie. Wrote a song about Dutch girls at one point. Wrote a song about the Bodegona, the supermarket in Antigua. Wrote a song about, I was writing songs every 2 days. We were writing songs about, like blues songs about, woke up in a fountain in the Parque Central. I remember bits and pieces. Guess it's best I can't recall. They were like, woke up wearing a crown from Burger King. And just funny songs about this and that, whatever. But 6 months in, Drew and I decided, hey, let's come up to the lake for a little weekend getaway. We haven't been to the lake yet. And then I meet Deedle. And so we got recommended by somebody to come to her hotel here, the Iguana Perdida.
Real quick, I just want to keep on structuring this in my head. The moment because to me, there's 3 moments here. There's the plane where you're like, I've seen the bluest skies. I've had full spiritual, such a grounded culture in Nepal. And then, what was it? Tom Jones or Clancy or whoever it is.
Tom Jones, yeah.
Johnny Walker. And also you're saying I'm leaving the pool and I'm risking jail time and my reward is Johnny Walker like that doesn't make sense. So then you're like, okay, if I can flip out of that.
Yeah.
But then there's that moment of, okay, I'm in this Antigua thunderstorm, hurricane. It's so cool how like just that arc. How long was this? Was this just like 3 months between those?
Well, between Nepal
Like between the pool and then
making
the
that clear decision while I was on the plane that I don't want to be in LA anymore, that I love that rock and roll pimp lifestyle. I had hair down to the middle of my back. Okay. I was like rock climbing on the weekends.
LA, you're talking,
I had these neighbors who started calling me the shaman because I was like, I had like this long, I was like a clean hippie. I was like, you know, a well-dressed, clean hippie. I looked like Jesus, but I wore like, you know, relatively nice clothes. And we were going out to every night to like, you know, concerts, comedy clubs, all this other stuff, eating in nice restaurants.
My big thing in life is useful hippie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Useful hippie is great.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to be the scumbag who just like, you know, shows up, you know.
Useful in an illicit sense though.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't, you know, I wasn't, you know, my primary skill wasn't like, you know, applying patchouli and fire twirling. It was like, you know, I could, you know, I could fix a carburetor and, you know, do whatever.
My primary skill.
So the transition period then, it was great to hit the reset button a little bit, go back up to Oregon and see my parents.
How many months are we talking?
That packing up the car in LA and leaving, telling my roommates that I was leaving, that, you know, they could carry on doing the growing thing. I would teach them how to do stuff if they wanted to do the growing thing. But that I was out of there and it was over. And so they were upset about that, obviously, and they were good friends. There was a while there in Southern California too, when I mean, those guys were good guys. I did get along with those two guys, but there were a lot of other people that I was hanging out with just because of weed. And it's not the right reason to be hanging out with people is like the drug that they consume, you know?
Yeah.
You gotta be careful, even if you like drinking, that you're not
alcohol.
That you're not hanging out with people just because they drink.
Yeah.
Or that you're not hanging out with pot smokers just because they smoke.
So
I mean, there has to be something more substantive about the person for me to be attracted to them as a friend or as a whatever. And these guys who I was living with were pretty cool, actually. They were great conversationalists. They had a lot going on for them. But a lot of people in that circle, I was just super glad to just walk away from and just like pack up my car. I'm off to Oregon. I'm going to go hang out with my folks for a while, and then I'm going to figure out a way to go and move and live abroad.
Yeah. So would you say that this first few months in Antigua showed you that, like, I reckon this is the balance I was looking for between that rock and roll lifestyle in LA and hiking down Annapurna circuit?
Yes.
This is them.
Yes, that's weird. I've never put it in that perspective before, but yeah. Yeah. I felt like the world opened up to me. I fell in love with Antigua. Like, I felt like it was like this sigh of relief and this amazing, like, I'm meant to be here kind of thing. It was just like it ticked my cultural boxes like crazy. It was fun because there was a vibrant scene going on. But also it was like, it was in that early days of this backpacker thing. There was like this, I'm helping people with the hurricane relief thing going on as well. You know, I wasn't hanging out, even in my last year at least that I was living in LA, I wasn't actually even smoking weed. I was growing it and, you know, enjoying the lifestyle, but I was just like, I don't want to do that anymore. It doesn't make me feel great. And I just want to get away from that. And, but in this scene in Antigua, I can't describe to you the sense of like, I'm in the right place. And then, I know you don't want me to get too far ahead in the story.
No, this is good.
Then I come up to the lake after 6 months of being there and just being absolutely in love with Guatemala. And I find this girl who just knocks me head over heels.
Okay, what is the love story? Come on, dish it out. Because I've heard a few different things. And does Deedle have two boyfriends? Who's this guy?
Okay, yeah, no, this is weird. This is weird. So I come up here for the first time and recommended so there was a bartender. And there's this bartender named Tanya who was working at the bar that was called La Fabrica that I was managing in Antigua. And she's like, hey, you know, we all wanted to get away for the weekend. Grab a couple of friends. Let's go up to the lake. And she says, I know this great place. I've been there. It's called La Iguana Perdida. You got to get off in Panajachel and then you got to get a boat. And you go to this village. It's called Santa Cruz. There's nothing there, but there's this really cool hostel there. And so I get off and I walk into the Iguana and there is this Australian guy and a Danish guy. And the two of them were running the show. and there were kerosene lamps at night. There was no electricity. And they had this game at the bar that you would roll the dice for the price of your Cuba Libre. You had like one die, and you would roll the die, and you would pay between 1 and 6 quetzales for your crappy XL Guatemalan rum, which doesn't even say rum anywhere on the bottle, by the way, and some Coke.
Cane
And
spirit.
we didn't even have ice because we didn't have a functional refrigerator. So it was like, because there was no electricity. There was one propane-powered refrigerator, and you were lucky if it would keep stuff below room temperature. and so there were warm beers. There were beers that were in that fridge behind the bar, and so they were like, meh, like maybe a little bit cooler than room temperature again. But you know, we get drunk on these Cuba Libres. We run down. We're like jumping in the lake, come back up. Had a fantastic time. Spent, I think, just one night here, and I slept in this room here at the hotel that was called the Birdcage, and it was. I remember me and I remember being with this girl, Tanya, and being with a couple other people. I can't exactly remember who it was, but we all crashed together in this crappy little room, and then woke up the next day, hungover. Maybe we spent 2 nights, I can't remember. And then we get in the chicken bus, and we chicken bus back to Antigua, and I'm like, wow, that was fun. That was great. Another month goes by, bartending, acting in plays, teaching English, hurricane relief, having a great time in Antigua. And then again, I'm like, oh, I want to go back to that lake. That was fantastic. By then I had like cemented my friendship with Drew, and Drew and I were just best buddies back, and just like, let's go to the lake. Come on. I know this place now. I'm the guy. I'm like, I know this place called the Iguana Perdida.
This is all in like this first 6 months you're in this country.
Yeah.
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 It's just, yeah.
Yeah. This is 6 months exactly into my stay in the country, I think. I drew, and there was at least 2 Danish people, and I want to say that there was a group of 5 or 6 of us, and we all came up together, and I brought my guitar with me.
Okay.
Or maybe there was a guitar here at the hotel.
Oh, Dave Wu's
and
future wife with guitar.
And I come up, and these 2 guys aren't there anymore.
Ooh.
It's Deedle who's there. And
you hadn't met Deedle before?
And I hadn't met Deedle before. But this time we probably spent 3 nights.
Okay.
But we were drinking. We were like just downing, beers from breakfast until nighttime. I'm 28. And still had a good head of hair on me back then.
Oh, yeah.
And I was, I think I had my scene going on in Antigua.
And you're the man. You brought the...
Well, and from her perspective, probably, I was this guy who rocks up. It's like cracking jokes, playing guitar. I'm like singing the chicken bus
Was
song.
it Burger King of Antigua?
It was, yeah, exactly. And Drew is with me, and Drew's like my right-hand man, and like I said, my muse in many ways, and whatever. And we're just like, having an absolutely fantastic time. And so I catch the eye of the owner, obviously. Mm. And we all ran down in the middle of the night to go like skinny dipping in the lake. We used to be able to just run down straight off the dock and jump in when there were no boats around. The water was cleaner down there back then. And we just go and jump in the water. We get back out. We're walking back up into the restaurant. Little did I know, she's gone and set a man trap. There was a fireplace over in the old restaurant area over there, and she's lit the fire, and she's put a couple of chairs right next to the fire, knowing that we had just been swimming. I was like, oh, come and hang out by the fire for a little while. And next thing I know, she's like sitting next to me. Next thing you know, I'm up in a room. But this is the funny part, is I'm up in a room with Drew, because she's like, oh, well, Drew's like, well, I got a little bit to smoke. Do you want to go back to your room and have a little smoke? And Deedle's like, yeah, sure. So the 3 of us go up to like Deedle's balcony. We're hanging out having a smoke. But by then she's like got her hand on my knee and stuff like that. Okay. And I'm like, okay, game on. And I'm looking at Drew like, hey, bud, it's getting a bit late, isn't it? And he's like, oh, that reminds me of another story. And I'm just like, dude,
Drew, get out of here.
Take the cue, man. Get out of here. So Drew eventually leaves. We have a spectacular night. And then the next day I've got to go back to Antigua. And I remember leaving her like, this is how cheap of a backpacker I was doing. I'm showing up to her hotel, and I brought my own booze. So I had brought like a bottle of wine from Antigua.
With Cuba Libre is a 1Q potentially.
Exactly. But I had like brought this bottle of wine. I think I left her the bottle of wine because she was busy working the next day with a little note saying, I had a lovely time. Wonderful to see you. I hope I get to see you again soon, kind of thing. And I felt like it was like it was something, that this wasn't just like a fling.
She's here and you're there, like,
and
you're
I'm in
both
Antigua,
living, right?
and she's like, I'm gonna get in touch with you, kind of thing. think I probably left her. Again, I have trouble sometimes remembering how stuff worked before the internet and things like that. But I know by then I had a house phone in Antigua, and she had my number. And she had an office over in Panajachel, which was the way that she would communicate with people back then.
Okay.
The Iguana Perdida had an office in Pana that was manned in the mornings for like a few days a week.
Perfect.
Where they could check emails, answer phone calls. There was an answering machine, an old school answering machine. So you'd answer phone calls. We would get distributors to come with like, maybe some supplies they would deliver over there, and then we would bring them back over here. Anyway, I'm back in Antigua, no phone call. Nada. Like a week goes by. And I think I've got a journal entry in an old journal going, well, that's disappointing.
Yeah.
I thought this was really something, but,
Just
haven't
to
heard
skew
from
it to
her
the
or
heart.
anything like that, like that's a bit of a bummer. And I'm managing this restaurant for this friend who I'd met through the theater in Antigua, and I'm in her restaurant one night, and all of a sudden, who walks in? Deedle. But she comes walking in with one of these two guys who I had met here at the hotel. And I had known that she had started the business with one of those guys, and it was a boyfriend, but that they had since broken up, according to her. But by all accounts, he was still very much in there, wanting to be in there with her. And she's like, well, I've broken up with him and that's over, kind of thing. But they're still running the business. They're still business partners.
Sure.
They're still vaguely sharing a house here even. I'm like, what's going on? Is this have you really broken up with this guy? Have you not? Are you doing this drama seeking thing of now bringing your boyfriend into the restaurant where this guy works who you've just hooked up with, kind of? So I greeted her and I was like, hey, what's up? How's it going?
Yeah. Owner of the hostel.
Is this the guy? And we're like, well, let's go. I'm still at work here. I got an idea. Let's go to Ricky's La Fabrica after everything shuts down here at my restaurant, and I'll meet you there later tonight. So I meet her there later that night, and she's still with this guy. But by then I realized, no, this guy wasn't the ex-business partner and ex-boyfriend, or current business partner and ex-boyfriend. This is a guy who she's now gone into business with this sailboat down on the other side of the country. So her idea of breaking up with her boyfriend, her Danish boyfriend at the time, was, I've got an idea. We'll start a new business together. You, me, and this Australian guy named Mark. And it's going to be a boat, and it's going to be 9 hours away from here. So her idea was you guys will be down there fixing up this boat, and you'll be way the hell away from me, and I'll be up here. And so anyway, I realized then this is not the ex-boyfriend, that she is serious about us, exploring a relationship of some sort. So then she comes back to my place in Antigua that night. We carry on with our little fling kind of thing. And then I came up here to the lake. I can't remember how long after that. And then she would come and see me in Antigua on her way down to the Rio Dulce to go and fix up this boat. The idea of the boat was she wanted it would be another scuba diving adventure because she already had scuba diving here. And so she was like, well, we've got the equipment. We found this boat. And it was cheap.
And it was massive.
And it was
62-foot Trimaran.
62-foot Trimaran, 40-something feet wide, 62 feet long. It was the only Guatemalan-made boat to have ever sailed around the world. It had an amazing history. It was built by this American guy. He built it in the Rio Dulce. He cut down the trees. He planed the wood.
What?
He imported the resin. He imported the fiberglass. He imported everything. He built this boat in the Rio Dulce back in the war years. And then he sailed it around the world with a carpentry shop on board. And he would be making stuff for people as he sailed around the world with his carpentry skills that he had.
Oh, my God.
And then he boats back in here to Guatemala. And anyway, he sells the boat to a guy who was a bank robber who later got picked up by the FBI. But the bank robber guy was the one who sold it to Deedle before he got picked up. And so Deedle and her two partners bought it on the cheap. And then they sanded it off, thought all we got to do is give it a quick paint job, a quick clean off, and then we're going to take off and we're going to go on our first dive expedition.
The Belize
they pull it out, dry, dock it to start cleaning it and painting it, and the whole keel falls off the boat. And they realized that there was rot throughout the whole boat.
This is wood.
It's a wood boat, wood and fiberglass boat.
Yeah.
So they spent 9 months fixing up the boat. And that was when I met Deedle, was when she was in the process of fixing up the boat with these two business partners of hers. Luckily, Guatemala was booming back then post signing of the peace accords, the Iguana was making a little bit of money.
Okay.
Every bit of money that the Iguana was making was going into fixing up this boat. Deedle hadn't paid for the land yet, even off of this guy Sarito, who she bought it off of. So she was making payments to Sarito, and Sarito was very kind. He said, hey, look, I can tell that you're trying to do this other thing right now. I don't need the money right now. If you want to like hold off on paying me for 6 months or something like that, that's fine. So she like stops paying him. She's stuffing like thousands of quetzales in her bra, getting on a chicken bus, coming to Antigua to see me, and then jumping on another chicken bus the next day down to the Rio Dulce to go and buy plywood, fiberglass materials. Meanwhile, this boyfriend of hers, ex-boyfriend, who still wants to be boyfriend, is like getting really resentful. He's coming back up here to the Iguana occasionally too, because he's still like a partner in the business up here, and he wants
just probably like trying to hold down his territory,
getting away from the Rio Dulce, trying to piss in the corners, hold down his territory, and then, but she's fallen totally out of love with him, and then I come back up here and I find people have like, we used to have a paper guest book back then, and people would be, oh, love Dave so much, great to see you, Dave, chicken bus song, da da da, and Deedle. And this guy, Mike, her ex-boyfriend, knows about me.
Mike's the Danish
but has never met me. And then sees my name in the guest book and gets super pissed off. They're fighting. Every time he's up here, they're fighting.
Okay.
Luckily, it was a Norwegian friend of ours, Eric, who goes to
Miss Eric
Deedle and Mike one day and says, I want you both to come up for dinner at my place. This is ridiculous. It's been going on for far too long, kind of thing. Brings them both up there and sits them down and says, all right, you're going to separate, and you're going to separate the business. Deedle, you're going to pay him something that he's owed for his last 3 years of work and putting in thing here. Mike, you're then going to leave, and you're going to be a partner in the boat down there, and then that's it, and you're going to go live down there, and this is going to be Deedle, and that's the way things are going to go. And they were like, okay.
For context, today Eric is still around. And summoned us to...
and just tried to summon us to dinner tonight, saying, David, darling, tell Tim he's to be at my place at 5 o'clock this evening. and so anyway, I'm eternally indebted to Eric for that. But that kind of cleaned things up a little bit.
So Deedle was now out of the boat thing?
Deedle was still involved in the boat thing. This guy, passively. Mike, then eventually dropped out of the boat thing because in all the drama of Santa Cruz, he went and hooked up with a Danish woman who was living next door at the Hotel Arca de Noe. And the two of them are still married to this day, and they've got kids and live back in Denmark, but it was a full-on soap opera back then. It was like Deedle hooks up with this guy, Mike hooks up with that girl who's over there, and anyway, they live back in Denmark and have got kids. Deedle and I have got now 2 kids, and it's going on 30 years down the road.
This is great lore.
Right? But it was a turbulent time. For sure. But in my timeline in Guatemala, I moved to Guatemala in 98.
Mm-hmm.
I meet Deedle in 99. I move out of Antigua and up with her into the lake in 2000.
Okay.
We get married in 2001. We have our first child in 2002. So it was like every year I was ticking off something pretty big.
Yeah.
So there was like
So Guatemala is clearly the place, the fertile land for you to lay down your life, essentially.
Yeah. And in the beginning, it was like, I'm going to give it 6 months living abroad in Guatemala. Like I said, on my first night, half of me was ready to like pack up and head back to the airport. Because I was like, I'd gotten through the flight down here, but then there's this hurricane going on. I'm staying in a hotel that's too expensive. I hadn't met anybody yet. I was like, I don't speak any Spanish. What am I doing here? But then when I pretty quickly fell in love with Guatemala after that and with Antigua. And then I had traction and was like, this is amazing. This is an amazing land. And then I had met this woman who I had flipped. And I was coming up from Antigua to see her as much as I could on the chicken bus all the time, which used to take closer to 4 hours back then. I come up one time and I come walking into the Iguana, and I knew the couple of volunteers. Deedle only had like 2 volunteers who worked at the Iguana back then. It was very slow. And these guys go, hey, Dave. And then they went, oh, shit. And I went, what? And they went, well, Mike is coming up. He's probably on the boat behind you. And this was before they had the official Eric breakup thing. And I was like, oh, fuck. So then she goes, Deedle's up at this other friend's house over there. Go up and say hi to her and she'll tell you. So I go up to this other house and Deedle's like, yeah, thanks for coming all the way up here to see me. But yeah, Mike just announced that he's on the way up and he's going to be here. And so it's probably best if you're not around the iguana. So she puts me in this other neighbor's house for the night. It's like midnight. I'm hungry. She finally brings me a cold plate of food to the house. At the next morning, I wake up at like 6 o'clock in the morning to then get on a boat, get out, get on a chicken bus and go back to Antigua. Didn't even get a chance to like
Dave,
see her really.
You are the other woman.
Because I was the other woman. Yeah. I was that hoe coming in and family wrecker.
Yeah.
And, but then, you know, he's out of the picture. She still has the boat with the Australian boat captain. I'm then really good friends with the Australian boat captain guy as well. We finally get the boat back up and running. Actually, he was still on the scene then. They did a New Year's cruise for the Millennium.
Oh,
So
shit,
1999 going into 2000,
Awesome.
they finally had the boat fixed up and they were able to go out for a New Year's cruise. And everybody had thought that they were like these trust fund kids who had all this, but they were down in the Rio Dulce, which again, rough area down there. And they're sweating and they're putting all their money into this thing. They were different partners, had different low moments at different times. And like this Australian guy, I remember he was like vomiting one night from worry. He was just so upset because it was like all the money he had in the world.
Yeah.
And they were there with this boat that still wasn't seaworthy and sinking even more money into it. And anyway, they finally got it up and going and they brought out a trip with a few paying people and a few other people who were just friends. And they sailed down the Rio Dulce, Deedle with tears in her eyes on New Year's 99. And they sailed out to the Sapodillas, the southern keys of Belize, and they went scuba diving out there, and they had a compressor on board, and they had booze, and they had food, and they had a fantastic time. And they came back. And then after that, for about 2 years, we were trying to sell scuba diving trips from like Iguana Perdida, no electricity, cheap-ass backpackers. We're trying to sell them on what a great deal it is that they can go on a live-aboard trip out of the Rio Dulce out to the southern keys in Belize, do 3 dives a day, get food, get booze, and that it was only going to cost them like $250 or something like that, which is a steal. Yeah. But it was $250 to backpackers, so it was such a strain. In the end, like after 2 years of trying to do this, and some very successful trips, we had a fantastic time out there. In the end, after we finally managed to sell the boat and the business to some other people, we did the numbers and it was about a break-even deal for Deedle. But amazing memories of going out there on this live aboard and diving in these beautiful untouched coral reefs back then off of these little remote islands.
It's the second biggest race system in the world.
Yeah. Next to some shitty place out in your neck of the woods.
10 times bigger.
Yeah, well, you know. But, you know, you'd go out with cigarettes and beer in the boat, and we would trade the cigarettes and the beer to these local Garifuna fishermen who lived out there on these islands. And like, hey, man, you know, welcome back. You have some smokes for us, man. Yeah, man, you got conch, you got lobster. Yeah, give me a minute. I remember this one guy named Byron, and he had like permanently bloodshot eyes, and he had shaved bald head, and he could hold his breath longer than anybody I've ever seen. He would go down, and it'd be like you'd be looking at your watch going, is Byron still alive down there? And he would go down for like 2.5 minutes and he would come back up with like lobster and conch in his hands and come swimming back up to the boat going, all right, man, how about some smokes and some drink? You know? and so we would trade him for lobster and conch and we just had great times then on that boat, scuba diving with guests. You know, I remember the Australian boat captain was just having the time of his life too, because he was a horny old devil.
Oh, yeah.
I actually wrote a song about him called Horny Toad at one point. He's a horny toad. But he had this one trip with like this California rich family who was coming down, like this father and mother and their 2 fairly well endowed daughters. And the dad, like day one, they're like cruising down the Rio Dulce and he goes, hey, can I have a word with you for a second? Yeah, what? He goes, well, you know, we're from, you know, my daughters just really wanted to know, would you be offended if they like took off their tops while they're on the boat? This boat captain was like, knock your socks off, mate. and they were like this full-on liberal California family. He ends up like hooking up, I think, with both daughters out on this trip out to the islands, and is having the time of his life. And we would leave here from the lake occasionally, and we would go down there and do either one trip or two trips with him out on the boat, and then we'd come back up here to the lake. He would come from the boat back up here to get away every now and then, but there was this constant pressure of selling these trips, and it was just not viable for long term. So eventually sold the boat. And but then by then the iguana is getting more and more popular. You know,
And you probably spat out Theo.
and we had a baby back then. We built our house. We moved into our house behind the iguana when Theo was 3 months old. So we tried to get it finished in time for his birth, and it always takes longer to do all the finishing touches than you think and stuff like that.
Sure.
But we moved in there with him, and then we had electricity at our house for the first time ever, you know, because we lived here for years before then with no electricity at all.
Do you know what happened to Matt and the boat now? Do you have any idea?
Mark,
Mark,
the Aussie guy on the boat. And so Deedle and Mark were business partners by then. I think maybe Mike was still a silent partner or ex, and they figured out a way to pay him in Denmark for his share of whatever when it was all done.
But like right now, like 25 years
And the
later.
boat sold to some Dutch people who then were like angry about the fact that, you know, they felt like they had been deceived, that they had, you know, we were hustling to sell these trips, and they thought that they could open an office in Antigua and that people would just come rushing in and be like, I want to go on your boat. And so anyway, they were upset about it. They then sold it to somebody else. The last thing I knew, there was a Dutch woman, I think, and her man who owned it. And while we were with my boys one time on a trip, I think maybe it was the trip when we went to the Mirador up in the Petan. We drove through the Rio Dulce to get up north to the Petan, and we spent a couple of nights there, or a night there on the Rio Dulce. And Deedle went in search of her old boat, and she heard from people. The boat was called That, because the guy who built it, this crazy American guy who built it in the middle of the jungle, he had built boats before, and he built an old catamaran at one point, and he was sailing into some snooty yacht club in South Africa, and he pulled up to this yacht club and went in. And the South African guy was like, where have you come in from? And he said, oh, I just sailed from Tahiti or something like that. And they pointed down to his boat and they went, in that?
It's like,
And he said, that's going to be the name of my next boat. So when he built this Trimaran, he called it That. And so Deedle was in the Rio Dulce. We're looking around like, oh, yeah, I think she's not sailworthy anymore, but she's under the old bridge in the Rio Dulce, you know, that great big bridge that goes across.
there's a lot of
So we
Fred
go
Allen
down-
stickers on that bridge.
You go, hello, hello. And this woman appears, leathery skin. My kids are downright scared because she looked like an old hag, like this old witch, this woman. And then she's like, oh, I used to own this boat. I was just wondering if we could come on board. Like, oh yeah, come on board, you know. And they greet us and they're nice to us. And it's like stepping into a little vignette and hearing their story and hearing the words coming out of their mouths as to what they want to do and what they're gonna do, but then seeing the reality of what it is. And it was like these people didn't have what it was going to take to get this boat back up and sailing again. They hadn't done basic repairs. The halyards had broken. The sail was down. It was dry docked. It wasn't dry docked. It was docked though in a marina there, and they were living on board, and it was basically just their house. And they were kind of aging alcoholics who had just come there. And I heard word recently that the guy of the partnership, he actually died of dengue very recently.
Oh, wow.
I'm a part of a group now online that's called like Rio Dulce Sailors and something or other.
Sure.
And they posted up that this guy who was one of the owners of that had gone and died of dengue. So
on
this
him.
woman apparently, I guess, still owns it. It was my older son's dream that he wants to like make it rich, buy the boat, get it all fixed back up again and get it sail worthy.
Is that just because he wouldn't have any memories himself, but it's like this peak moment of his parents' life?
Exactly,
almost, yeah.
exactly. I wrote another song when we were on the boat. Have I ever played my song "Full Sails" for you?
No.
Oh, it's a great one. It's
Next year.
yeah. Full sails in the morning sun, Mexican beer and Jamaican rum, horizons of islands and skies full blue, and knowing that suffering's coming to you. It's this song about this guy who's like hates this woman he was in a bad relationship with, and now he took all the money and he went and he bought himself a boat. He
Right.
divorced her, and now he's just out on this boat and like sailing and this like enjoying life kind of thing. So it's got like a little bit of like this sort of Bob Dylan misogynistic song in it about like this woman who done me wrong, like don't think twice, it's all right kind of thing. But now I'm out on this boat and loving life. But Deedle's father got to go out before he passed away. He got to go out on the boat at least once, I think a couple of times, and he was in seventh heaven. And he said that he dreamed of filling up one of the outriggers with rum and the other one with red wine, and then sitting in the middle with two giant straws out in the Caribbean and just sipping rum and red wine out of these two straws.
So I can imagine doing that. Maybe in a throne on the cockpit.
Eric, absolutely, yeah. Yes, darling. Yes, bring me some more ceviche.
Oh, that's so good. You mentioned a character. There's been a lot of characters mentioned, and I love it. And one in particular who I've heard from a few of the, Erics, the Bills of the town. I've heard multiple perspectives and stories. What is your take? What is your rendition of Sarito?
Wow. So I know a lot about Sarito's history. He was a classically trained architect. His father ran a tea plantation in India. He was raised for a while by white-gloved servants in India.
Wow.
But then it was back during the war. He was being schooled in the UK.
World War II?
As were a lot of, back during World War II, as were a lot of people who lived in the colonies. You would educate your kids back in the UK. The Blitz broke out. He needed to be sent back home. He told me amazing stories of getting on board this ship to be sent back to his parents, because at the time they wanted to get the kids out of danger's way. And if you had parents who lived abroad, you should be back with your parents because shit's getting real now. And so they had a giant steamship that was leaving the UK, and they put all the kids who were expats on it, and all the kids were being sent back home. And there were about 2,000 kids on board the ship and about 10 adults in charge. And Sarito said it was just a giant playground. He said he never had a better time in his life. All these kids tearing around board the ship, having a fantastic time. And then he gets dropped off back with his parents in India, spends, part of the war back there until it's safe to come back to London again. He eventually comes back to London. He gets a degree from Durham University in architecture, and there are no jobs to be had in the UK after the war. So he moves to Australia, and he found loads of work to be had there, and he could actually get paid real money. He gains a lot of fame being an architect. He built a lot of the beautiful first houses that were in Byron Bay and around that area and outside of Sydney and here and there. And next thing you know, he is married. He's got 2 adopted children, and he has got a successful architectural career and is got a speedboat. He's got a sports car, and he's absolutely miserable. And eventually decides to drop everything, join an ashram in India.
Including his wife and kids?
Divorced his wife, gave her all the money, the house, the everything.
Everything.
And then I think probably had a lot of guilt because he should have, because he abandoned his kids as well. He left and he joined an ashram in India. Wow. There's a dark side of the going and seeking your spirituality thing. From my perspective as a dad, I couldn't imagine ever leaving my kids and going and doing that. But he decided that's what he needed to do. And so he left. He joined up with then he was known as the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh in India, in Pune, in India. And he joined the ashram there. And Bhagwan named him, his name used to be Andrew Graham Howell Young. And then the Bhagwan named him Sarito.
Actually, episode 9 of this podcast is with someone who is kind of disciple of a similar figure in India. Yeah.
So he was there with him in India. He then made the move with him when he moved from India to Oregon, and he designed the whole compound in Oregon that they lived in. And then if you've ever seen Wild Wild Country on Netflix, it's the show that's all about the compound up in Oregon.
This guy's called Bhagwan.
He changed his name to Osho.
Yeah.
So there he was changing everyone else's name, and eventually he changed his own name from Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. He was then called Osho.
He's an
possibly
Indian bloke?
He and Noam Chomsky at a certain point were the 2 most published living people on planet Earth, because Noam Chomsky, the famous linguist and political writer, churned out books like crazy. Osho would sit and he would say, he's obviously a very intelligent guy to be the kind of guru that he was and to get this huge following of people and to talk all these people into joining his. I mean, I've always been of the opinion that what's the difference between a religion and a cult? It's the only difference of the number of people you're talking about and that are.
And the longevity of it.
And the longevity of it, exactly.
So real quick, do you happen to know if Sarito, this guy, while in Sydney, had visited India, then come back and be like, okay, I need to just shit
He
this.
must have.
Yeah, he must have.
He must have started to catch wind of some of this spiritual stuff that was going on. He was older than most of the hippies. He actually, when was it? It would have been after the war, or was it the tail end of the war? That he ended up actually serving for a while, and he was kind of like in intelligence in like France for a bit.
Wow.
But he had so he was older than the hippie generation by a little bit, but he was totally into the tune in, turn on and drop out thing. And eventually he did drop out. He was a very spiritual man who wanted to know more, very studious and very, reading philosophy, trying to figure out what life was all about. And obviously thought that this guru had figured out a little bit more about, or at least he wanted to live a life of introspection. He wanted to meditate. He wanted to try to figure out more of what life is about. He wanted to live on this compound with this guru, have talks every day about philosophy and life and love and art and laughter and dancing and music and free sex, which was a big thing of the free love was a big thing of the compound as well.
So they were basically building, like a town in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, right? And it was like...
They had it first in Puna, and then they moved it to a different area in Puna that they called Puna 2. And then they moved from Puna 2 to this area in Oregon. And then that led to huge controversy with a lot of people up in this conservative area in the States. They tried to take over politics there and put their own people in charge of the local town council. It was much resentment going on. And then eventually this woman named Sheila poisoned the salad bar at the local Sizzler. And it was the first act of domestic bioterrorism ever in the United States. And that then allowed the FBI to come in, raid the whole compound, break everything up and the whole thing. And then everybody took up. Sheila was like this wild card. Watch Wild Wild Country.
Yeah, I have to.
It's Wild Wild Country.
So it's like Georgetown went a different direction.
It's on Netflix. And
Jonestown.
Jonestown. Yeah. But instead of wanting everyone to die like Jim Jones did, Osho was like, I don't know where I stand on this whole thing because I know a lot of the people who were involved there who were like, and Sarito and I used to have great conversations about philosophy, about, why he was there, why he joined the compound, what he was into. Sarito was an exemplary man of like, talk the talk and walk the walk. There were other people who joined up there who were just like into the free sex thing. Right. And they're like, my name is so-and-so. I'm a sannyasin, which means enlightened one, by the way. So they would call themselves enlightened ones. And then you'd meet this dude down here in Santa Cruz. After the Oregon thing broke up, Sarito then lived in California for a long time. He then got a postcard from a friend saying, come here to Atitlan, look how beautiful it is. Eventually he comes here. He buys this land here. He built prefab 3 houses over in Panajachel in 4-foot by 8-foot sections numbered, because he had power tools over there because there was electricity over there.
Okay.
He then numbered them, put them onto a great big boat, floated them over here, carried them all up on site, and hammer and nailed them together here on site in Santa Cruz. He built a sauna, and
this is the
he had a gasoline-powered water pump, a big tank up the back, gravity-fed water down into the rooms.
Brilliant.
And
are these rooms still around?
Yeah, those are the original 3 houses that he built, or the 3
dorms.
houses that are still here. And the original sauna that he built was here.
Brilliant.
But I'm getting off track now with my Sarito story. But he that was what he did when he broke away from the ashram. But then, or not broke away, when the ashram fell apart and he got kicked out, kind of thing. But he still had all of his contacts from back there in the days of Oregon and the days of India.
How many people are in?
And he was very much in the inner circle as well of the Oregon thing.
How many people were in this town in Oregon? Do you know?
I'll have to go back and look at the thing. Thousands,
yeah.
And from all over the world.
Wow.
And he came down here. And then because Sarito was this cult of personality character and in the inner circle as well, he started telling friends, oh, you should come here. It's great. So a bunch of people that he knew back there moved here, either built or rent or bought here in Guatemala and set up here. And for a while, they called Santa Cruz here, they called it Bhagwan Bay, because there were all these people from up there that were living here. So when I first came here, I would meet like, you know, Naresh and Anando and Narupa and Nirguna and Prema and all these other people who were like, had all these Indian names, who were like, you know, California hippies and Australian hippies and people from all over the place who had been a part of that thing. And then some of them were very cool spiritual people. Others of them had this name that the guru had given them, and they're busy, like, you know, trading stocks online and watching, you know, with their widescreen TV, football and things all day long. And they just didn't strike me as incredibly spiritual people.
Sure.
But Sarito carried with him his learnings and his spirituality and his everything up until his death. He died with us here at the Iguana, and he, one of the last big things that he did in the years before he died was he wrote this composition of all the great philosophers, and they're like a brief of all their different philosophies and what they believed in and things, and, you know, back from Socrates all the way up and through. So he was always exploring, always curious. He kept journals. He taught himself how to paint. He was this classically trained architect. He built tons of houses around here. He built mansions, and then he built little shacks. He built all that modular housing that they had on the ranch in Oregon, and that taught him a lot on how to build cheap and fast. And but he also built luxury mansions outside of, you know, in Australia, and great big homes. And but he loved when I moved up here from Antigua, because I had some theater experience and stuff as well. And he started this thing called SCAMS, the Santa Cruz Arts and Music Society. And so he would have little meetings. Hey, we're having a SCAMS thing this week. It's great. I'll provide the paintbrushes and the watercolors, and we're all going to come and we're just going to do freeform painting and paint whatever we want to paint. So it was like we would just have like little, and those were the days in Santa Cruz too, when people would just drop by people's houses all the time, and you had impromptu parties. Nobody had electricity. And there were guitars laying around everywhere, and there were all these old hippies around. And if someone needed a hammer, they would come by and borrow one from somebody else, and people were building their houses. And it was this little community of weirdo expats that was here. And that's changed a lot over the years as well. But back then there was a real sense of a budding foreign community in Santa Cruz, and a real coherent foreign community. Unfortunately, it was all people of the same age who were all like way older than Deedle and I. But we hung out with all them anyway, and we were very much the center of the community because we had the place that was the business where people could come and get food and drink and gather.
And fresh
like
kind
that.
of people as well. As
Yeah.
like just for a conversation or a party.
But then a lot of these people have started to die off now. Sarito died, Anando died. You know, a lot of these other people that were that original group that was here, they're either too old to come here now, which is a shame, or they've gone and died. But that was the original thing of the foreign community in Santa Cruz, other than a few Germans who were around. Sarito used to laugh and say in the beginning that, when he first arrived here,
So like
there were 3 or 4 Germans who lived here, and none of them got along with each other. And they all very much kept to themselves, and they didn't have businesses or things like that as well.
Because there's
Well,
Hans
that's
and
not true.
Havelito.
Wolfgang and Anna, they had started the Arca de Noe, and they were
Okay.
an Austrian couple. And they were here when Sarito built originally. When he built the houses, they were already here, and they set up the Arca de Noe. But then he just set it up as like a little compound for his friends to come and live. It was like a little hippie commune. They would pay him some rent. They would live here with him. This little community of people who like to walk around naked and paint and, you know, whatever. And then he wanted to go back to India.
Okay.
And so he wanted to sell. And then he was passing around these flyers. And Deedle was a backpacker. She had gotten certified how to dive, and she was wandering the streets in Panajachel, trying to look for some place for her family to come and stay, because they were going to be out here for Christmas. And she had already done an overland trip down to Argentina by then in a combination of a chicken bus and a giant truck that had been converted. This crazy Argentinian guy did an overland trip from Guatemala all the way down there. She had participated
How the
in
hell
that.
did he get to the
She
Gap?
had gone out to they put it on a boat to the
Wow.
Gap. She had already been certified as a dive instructor. She was then with her Danish boyfriend, dive instructor as well. And they were walking down the street in Panajachel, and they ran into this woman who her boyfriend knew was an underwater archaeologist, and she wanted to do mapping of Lake Atitlan. And there was going to be this big project that she was organizing where they were going to get young people to come down and volunteer to come and map the lake, and but they were going to need someplace to come and stay. Meanwhile, Deedle's handed a flyer by this guy. Later, this guy who handed her the flyer, I kid you not, the guy who handed her the flyer saying land for sale in Santa Cruz. That was Sarito's place back then.
Yeah.
So she jumps on a boat and comes out here.
Was
the guy who handed her the flyer got picked up like 10 years later in Panajachel, pedophile. Nobody knew. I didn't know. I knew the guy. I used to say hi to him in Pana all the time. I know he's a creepy motherfucker who was like, you know. And anyway, Deedle gets handed this flyer. She jumps on a boat. There were only a few boats a day back then. There were the big metal boats that were going around. Now there's speedboats going back and forth all the time.
The big
metal boats used to go by like back then, like in the beginning it was like 3 times a day. Then maybe it was like 5 times a day. There were boats that were going at like, 8 in the morning, 10, noon, 2, and 4, or something like that. If you miss that boat, you sit around, you wait for the next one, kind of thing. So anyway, she comes out here, she checks out the land. Within 24 hours of having been on the lake in her life, she goes, I want to buy this land because this underwater archaeological project is going to be going on. This woman's going to be bringing down the volunteers. They need someplace to base their operation. These people are going to need someplace to stay. These houses are here. This guy's willing to sell it to me on terms. I don't have the money to pay for it, but I can pay him over time. Yeah. He wants the money because he wants to go back to India, Sarito. And so Deedle buys the place from him, signed the paperwork on like Christmas Eve, 2025. And
so family can come.
And so then she's got some place for them to come and stay. But I think it was like a little too rustic for them. So when they came, they stayed at the Arca de Noe next door, actually, because they had private bathrooms over at the Arca de Noe. And her parents were like, I don't know, this place looks like, her father worked in insurance and was just like, this place seems uninsurable to me. I don't know. Yeah, and they slowly fell in love with Guatemala too. And Deedle's parents both absolutely love Guatemala over the years of coming out here all the time to get away from the cold back in the UK every year. Every year they would both come out, both of her parents. But then she took over the hotel. The underwater archaeological project fell through very early on because the woman didn't have the right paperwork from the Ministry of whatever, archaeology and anthropology. To be able to go ahead and do what she wanted to do here. But then Deedle had a dive compressor by then. She was borrowing some dive equipment from a dive shop in Guatemala City. She was with this Danish guy, Mike. Oftentimes she would find herself at night cooking dinner, still wearing a wetsuit, no electricity, kerosene lamp, trying to cook up some dinner because it was a busy night because they had 3 guests or something like that, Somebody wanted to buy the first sandwich and she still goes back to that moment. Like she made a sandwich and somebody was like, well, what do I owe you? And she was like, I don't know. Well, what do you want to pay me? Like, what sounds fair? She's had no experience ever running a restaurant, ever running a hotel, ever running a dive school in her life. And the place de facto, it was supposed to be like a base for a little camp of underwater archaeologists for a while. And it turned into a hotel, restaurant, bar, and scuba diving school.
So and I hope to maybe next year get Deedle on as well, so she can say her own story. But has she said to you, if you had that first night in Antigua of landing and it's thunderstorms and like, do I even want to be here? But then within a few weeks and months, it's all just rolling. Oh my God, this is the place for me. Has she ever described her equivalent of like, felt like the thing's gone through and oh my God, my parents don't like it and blah, blah, blah. That might be the equivalent of that in one night. But then what to her kept on rolling,
I think there was youth and confidence. Deedle's one of the more confident people I've ever met in my life. She's got that great combination of British Empire and a powerful girls' school that she went to. Okay. She went to this girls' school that churned out women who were like, I think, like just insanely confident young creatures who could go out anywhere in the realm and get people marching in straight lines. And she knew that she always had a family that she could fall back on as well in the UK if things went south. The original deposit that she put down here at the Iguana was some money that she got from an aunt, I think, at one point. And she was just adventurous as hell. And so I think even when the archaeological project fell through, she realized that there was some tourism here and they had the dive equipment and they were both dive instructors. So they could still live here cheaply enough to get people and then try to attract some tourists who wanted to come and learn to dive, or who didn't even want to dive, who just wanted to be someplace beautiful. And they had some rooms that they could rent out. So she kind of hit the ground running with it and was like, okay, plan B.
Yeah.
So I don't know if she ever had a come to Jesus moment, like, oh my God, maybe we should throw the whole thing in. I think when the archaeological, you'll have to ask her, but I think when the archaeological project fell through, they were just like, okay, what else are we going to do?
To have bought it and signed the paper within 24 hours, she must have had such a big wave of inspiration and seen some form of vision or felt something that and you're saying she's the kind of person to back those internal emotions and workings and whatnot. It kind of makes sense, I guess.
But insane confidence. I never would have done any of that.
Yeah.
I still would never run this business. If it wasn't for her, I would like sell this in a second and just be able to like put my kids in charge. Like,
yeah,
I don't have the confidence to be able to. I'm like the entertainer. I'm like the guy who makes people happy.
It is quite funny because you're always running around.
Songs. I come in, I'm like nice to people. I help, and then people ask me like, you know, things to start to get sticky over like employment issues or something like that, and I'm like, Deedle.
Yeah, you're always kind of running around. You're like, oh yes, you do this thing, and you kind of like having a gruff, but like you get involved. And
I get involved. But like I leave the big business to.
But you leave the sledgehammer up there.
Well, we do make the big business decisions together, and I think she appreciates having me around on the business front too. Because if somebody asks you something tricky, you can always be like, "I need to check in with my husband."
Yes,
and not make this, split decision right there in the moment. And she can come back and like bounce ideas off me, and I can bounce them off her and stuff like that.
And I think it's cool to see, and based off what you said way back with like, does Mick Jagger say the same song 100 times, and you have harnessed at least that ability to do that yourself, and then the way you two work means you've got some sense of sustainability and consistency with this place, so you haven't let it become crusty old resentful fuckers. But when
I'm way grumpier than her, by the way.
Sure.
I get like she keeps like keeping me in check, like I'm not gonna let you turn into a grumpy old man, because oftentimes I do go, again, not on stage, not right. When I'm out here there, but I do go home a lot of times at the end of the day, and I'm just like, fucking hell, I can't believe this person, they were, they got pissed off because they were vegan and we didn't make them a vegan dinner, but they never told us they were vegan. And they get to the front of the line and they're like, well, you never asked. Like, it's my job to ask, so I get home and she's like, it's okay, calm down, like,
have
whatever.
your mezcal dinner.
Exactly. Have your mezcal and, whatever. But I do, oh my God. And every time my phone rings as well, like, oh, if I had a phone call. Then I go, oh, it's my mom calling to tell me she loves me. I'm like, oh, okay, great.
Like those dad noises. Like,
I try not to get too grumpy. But.
Yeah, no, you're doing a pretty decent job at it, I would say.
I hope so.
But when you describe this like hippie, fluid, thing, the community feeling, especially way back in Santa Cruz, it therefore makes sense, because I always describe the iguana as well as what my romanticized image, or as close to it as I can imagine in this modern world, of like the old school hostel is. And you can't find that anymore because, as we say, like everything has fucking Wi-Fi through the roof, and it's basically a hotel for young people, which is gross and soulless. I'm like, the iguana might have a few of those things, and it's definitely, I'm sure, changed from the kerosene lamps and electricity, but in 2025, it's about as close as I've ever seen to that.
So here's the thing, and here's where I get to give my wife some true props, because she'll never pat herself on the back, and she should, because when she started up the Iguana, she had been a backpacker for a long time. When I met her, I had been a backpacker for a long time. And certain places where you've spent the night on your travels stick out. And for me, I remember backpacking, and I was in Interlaken in Switzerland, this beautiful area with these great mountains that you could climb, and Interlaken meaning in between lakes. So there were these beautiful lakes and mountains. And there was a hostel there, and it was called Balmer's. I still remember the name of it. And it's still there, I think. But when I stayed there, I was like, wow, check it out. They've got like an area for this. They've got an area for that. They've got like, and it just seemed to be well thought out. There was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, I could totally understand why like trekkers would make this place their base for a little while, because it was like, oh, I can do my laundry if I want to. They had like outdoor lawn bowling or something fun that you could do over there. They had a spot for this and a spot for that. And that place always stuck in my head. And then when she opened up in the beginning, it was 3 old wooden houses. She could turn it into whatever she wanted to turn it into. She, in the beginning, was, like I said, cooking dinner wearing her wetsuit. And she was just like, well, to hell with cooking dinner with my wetsuit on and like having people order off the menu. She's like, I'm going to make a fixed menu every night. So every night, this is dinner, take it or leave it. It was always vegetarian because there was no refrigeration. So, but then every Saturday night, she would go over to Pana on a Saturday and buy chicken and bring it back with her on the Saturday and cook it on the grill on a Saturday night. So every Saturday night, there was like a meat barbecue. So like all the meat eaters would be like looking forward to the Saturday going, whatever. And I can't wait for my piece of chicken on Saturday night so I can get my protein kind of thing. I think maybe we had cans of tuna fish back then before it was completely politically incorrect to do so. And
Is it?
Tuna fishing is like one of the big things in the seas. It's like you're politically incorrect.
No.
But
it
was like a canned source of protein that you could have. But other than that, I mean, it was like vegetable protein, and that was about it. So she sets up family style dinners. She's then like, well, I don't want to like just have local people here. I mean, you got to admit, we live in a very foreign culture here as well. So we've always had to try to walk that balance between being respectful of the local culture here, which I think we very much are, but also realizing that from a tourism point of view, that they can't necessarily be the front of house people to be welcoming to a backpacker who's coming in at the time. So she had this idea that, wait a minute, I've got beds is what I've got. I've got like space and I've got some food. So why don't I offer free room and board to people who will come and just help me? So in the beginning, she probably had like one person who was like a cool person who was here. Well, I know damn well she did. She still tells stories about like in the very beginning. And you find old things written in these original guest books of ours saying, I came to scuba dive. I found myself building a house. She was like these people. She would just be like, oh, you're a carpenter. We're actually building this house. And there's something early on in the building of a thing too that people are so willing to help out. If it's like an early thing, they're just like jumping on board, willing to help out. Once it's established and you're there and you're seen as like the boss of this big business, people are like, fuck you.
I'm just another cog.
Exactly, kind of thing. But in the early days there, everybody wanted to help. Oh, I can do this. Oh, I can do that. So Deedle would like filter them out and be like, what can I do with you? What can I do with you? I think when I first came here in 98 and met her, there might have been like 4 volunteers.
For context,
and there were no
have you got
shifts.
now?
There were no shifts during the day of like, I work in the morning, you work in the afternoon. It was just like everybody hangs out all day. I'm going to go for a swim. Okay, cool. I'll hang here just in case anybody shows up, And then some backpacker would come rocking up. There were no reservations back then because there was no internet and no phones or anything. So people just rock up. Hey, you got rooms? Yeah, we got rooms. So then she had this idea of like taking on volunteers for free room and board to come in and work. Family style dinners at night because it was easier to do. Having little games and activities that people could do, sitting around playing acoustic guitars, playing cards. That was what people did in like hostels around the world. But she really kind of set up this model for having the family style dinners, having the volunteers, things like that, other things that I can't even think of right now, that was then like outright copied by loads of people, not just here in Guatemala, but people all over.
All through
and like
Central
people
America.
say, oh, I went to this hostel in Colombia that totally reminds me of this place. And then we find out that like, oh yeah, the people who run the hostel in Colombia came and stayed at the Iguana back in the day. Yeah. And they were like, wow, I really like what you've done. I'm going to take this in my head and I'm going to go and do something else.
I don't know. I haven't traveled around just because I wasn't here 40 years ago to know what's the original one. And there's probably the facts of evolution works like this, where things pop up, like the same kind or similar ideas pop up into like, separately in different places. But it's certainly, I think in this part of the world, this sphere, Iguana seems just on a track record, as you say, to have propagated.
Other places that have popped up since that sort of copied the model that have done it really well and that are doing it really well.
I mean, just down the street.
Yeah, I mean, there's places around here and there that all over Guatemala who have done it and are doing it really well. But back then, it was like, if you were a backpacker, you were staying in like the Posada Ruiz Dos in Antigua. And Antigua is, a UNESCO protected heritage. You would have thought that they were getting it better there.
It's like a really
but
bad
literally,
hotel.
It was like a shitty mattress, like a horrible pillow and like a tin roof and this concrete block, whatever. And those were like the backpackery places that people were used to staying in.
No
if you were in Thailand, if you were in South America, if you were in wherever and you were backpacking, those are the kind of places that you would stay in. And then occasionally you would come across some place like this place Bombers in Switzerland that was like different. It was like, whoa, hey, this is cool. This isn't just like a bed for the night. This is like a place where people gather. and there was like a book exchange. You were like, wow, a book exchange at a hotel. Cool. Take one, leave one. Great. A note board on the wall where people would leave all these notes about like, hey, I'm going this way. Hey, if anybody sees Bob from, Ohio, tell him that I've gone to wherever, and that was how people used to communicate with each other. I mean, it was leaving post-restant letters at the American Express office in wherever. So if you knew someone was going somewhere, you could write them a letter there and be like, Tim Brown, post-restant, American Express office, Barcelona. And then you would rock up to Barcelona like a month later and you'd walk up and show your ID and be like, hey, I got an email. And then they would go, oh yeah, you got 3 letters. And they'd give you these 3 letters and you go, oh, wow. Oh, I missed, so-and-so coming through. Or, oh, I got a letter from my parents. And how great. But there were like very few of these places. And I think Deedle, I obviously helped her after I joined on board with it. And I hope I added something to it as well. But she set up this wonderful place that was a place where people could meet, where they could hang out. Guests early on came for a night and oftentimes spent 2-3 weeks. Backpackers moved slower back then as well. There was less of a checklist. Okay, I did that. Now I'm going to go do this. Now I'm going to go do that. It was more just like being here, moving around. What's cool? Oh, I like this place. I'm going to hang out for a while. Maybe I could help out a little bit and be one of the volunteers. That's how she recruited the volunteers. The few that she had in the beginning was just like somebody had finally decided that they had to move on, and she'd just be like, oh, but there's this cool guest here. Hey, why don't you stick around for a while? And then another guest would stick around for a little while. And everything moved slower, but it was, she got it right. And she made a lot of very right decisions in the beginning that just made this place like people's home away from home. And that was always the idea, was do good home cooking, provide a friendly, fun atmosphere, have some cool, English-speaking, cool travelers up front of house that were helping out so that people felt like they were at home when they were there. So they could get off of that backpacker trail for a while. Because when you're a backpacker, you're on edge a lot of the time as well. You feel like you can't necessarily relax.
It's a remnant
and you're eating rice and beans, and you're in a foreign environment, and you're just like, all I want's a good meal and someplace where I can let my hair down and get clean and whatever for a little while. And so when people came here, they felt that way. So, big up to her for doing that and for creating an atmosphere that a lot of other people, including loads of people who worked at the Iguana, who then left here and opened up their own places, being like, well, if they could do it, I can do it. And a lot of them did do it.
And they find their own cool spot, maybe not on a lake, maybe on a beach, maybe on a mountain.
And then, have volunteers and have family style dinners and have book exchanges and have, whatever. And just
It's actually really interesting you say that, because I take my back. When I was 18, I actually came to Guatemala first. To show, and I stayed in 3 semester and I got blind drunk, hated the lake. I was like, I'm getting out of here. I like opened my knee or something. I didn't drink for the rest of the 9 months and blah, blah, blah. But because I was on such a tight budget, backpacked very much like you say, staying in the Posada, Ruiz, Dulce or whatever. Yeah. And it was very like...
Another shout out, Posada, Ruiz, Dulce.
No, get racking them up, right? There's a count. It was very like, one big takeaway from that year was how lonely it was. So I was just really like raw dogging the travel and, getting on the chicken buses or the equivalent.
Well, if there was a place to hang out and meet people, it was a bar somewhere at night.
Right, and I wasn't drinking.
Yeah.
So then I missed out on that part. But I remember finally I was in Europe at the end and I got to this hostel in Granada, Spain. And probably similar vibe to this. And I had just the best 4 days. And that really stuck. And then for you, Interlaken, it's like, I'm really happy you described that, because I think I judge many of the modern backpackers because they only are here, and this is so much better to enjoy, and it's just more raw and stuff if you have done a few weeks or months of the raw dog in it.
Yeah.
And then you come here. Like me and the boys, Ted and Zav, we were just like hiking in Venezuela and getting lost hitchhiking in Guyana, but we were kind of able to dream about 4 or 5 days in the Iguana. And it was like,
Yeah. No, that is true. And again, I definitely don't want to be one of those guys that goes, you should have seen it 20 years ago, or you should have whatever. But there was a thing about, building up that traveling with that sense of anxiety, being in a foreign land, and then finally coming someplace where you could be in like your home away from home and let your hair down a little bit and just feel like, oh, this is great. Get some good home cooking, be able to relax, be able to meet up with other travelers and compare notes and things
now
like that.
Now there's 30 homes away from home.
But if every place is just like that, home away from home, it takes away the edge of traveling a little bit. But, again, I don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, it's not unique enough experience. It's not whatever. I'm glad that there are more comfortable places for people to come to. But like I said, it brings us back to like that now Guatemala is getting a lot more rolly bag people coming in.
Sure.
It's a lot more comfortable country to come to.
You have to
It's a
intentfully get off.
It's safe. It's comfortable. It's and you meet the people again, though, who are doing the checklist thing. The volcano here now we know hasn't blown up now for more than a week. And a lot of people were coming into Guatemala to come and do the volcano, as they called it, climb Acatenango and see over the Volcan Fuego, which was exploding. Well, it's just stopped exploding. So we're going to see what that means. But the number of backpackers who I've met, and you overhear the conversations. Did you go to Antigua? Yeah. Did you do the volcano? Yeah, I did the volcano. You going to do the volcano? Yeah, we're going to do the volcano. Oh, you're going to go then to the waterfalls? And yeah, we're going to do the Samuk Champé. You go to Paradon? Yeah, we're going to go there and we're going to do that. And a lot of the places that people go when they're going to those places are the same, maybe 2 or 3 hostels in each place that they've been recommended by friends. And they've been recommended by friends because they're those comfortable home away from home type places that you can go to and have a good vibe there and have and it's the party place. Right. Oh, well, no, I'm not going to that place because it's a little more party. We've always tried to walk that line too of being like, we probably used to be the party place in Santa Cruz, but the party meant an acoustic guitar and some bongo drums. And a fire.
Not just getting blind.
Sit around the fire and be like, and play some acoustic guitars and play some bongo drums. And, and then we had the Saturday night dress up things and that we started doing that, it was just started because somebody decided, hey, let's have a party tonight and I'll go to Pana and get dress up clothes. And it was a New Year's Eve. The best dressed person.
This is the original.
Best dressed person's going to win, a prize of some sort. I can't even remember what it was. And so everyone was over in Pana and they bought all these crazy clothes in the secondhand shop and they came back. And then a month later, they're like, let's do that again. Yeah, that was fun. Let's do that again. They go and they get more clothes and then they come back. And then there's a pile of clothes here. So they was like, hey, let's put on some of those clothes tonight. And, everyone dress up and just freak out the people that are coming in the front door because everyone's just in drag or something like that.
It's so fun because last night was Saturday and I'm there. It's actually one of my favorite things because I've gone to the Packers, the op shops in Pana, and bought a few things like weird coats, and I just got a giraffe onesie and stuff. And because I always just leave them, so last night I was looking around, I was like, oh yeah, I bought that.
Yeah, I bought that.
And then you see people, the backpackers coming in, they're loaded up, and they're going to check in, and then they're like. Everyone's normal because everyone's acting normal because everyone's dressed up, but you're getting checked in by some dude.
But maybe they have heard about it. You can tell the people who maybe have heard about it and they've just kind of got a casual smile on their face. And there's some people who haven't heard about it that are looking around going, what the hell? What is this place? Back years ago, there was in the old side of the Iguana before we had electricity. There was this big boat pulled up, and it was a Saturday night, and we're all dressed up in these crazy clothes. And this boat stops at the waterfront and it's full of these completely butch Guatemalan guys who had been on an off-road quad bike thing over on that side of the lake. And they're on their way back to Panajachel and they're all muddy and they're all, adrenaline out, Mr. Macho kind of thing. And they get off to see if they can get some beers here because they see that there's a restaurant, and they're like, maybe they got cold beers. And this guy comes walking up and instantly he sees a 2-meter tall Dutch guy in a pink dress or something like that. He's like, ¿Qué putas? Está lleno de huecos. He's just like, this place is filled with gays. Let's get out of here, And the other guy who's his friend was like, hold on a minute, And he comes in and he's having a good laugh and he's going, oh, this is great. He goes, you guys on this place? What the hell are you doing? The dress up, you do this thing? He goes like, oh, this is fantastic. You guys got any beers? And we're like, yeah, can I buy? Yeah, sure. So he gets a bunch of beers from us. But his buddy's like, I'm not going in there, man. And they run down, they take the beers, they get back on the boat and they float back over to Panajachel. But it was like this guy had stepped into this alien planet full of trans, foreigners or something like that. And he was so scared. You could tell it was insulting his masculinity.
Okay. So based off that, and we've touched on it a few times, based off that, Santa Cruz already from those original Osho hippies and then what you're building here of this little home away from home for these foreign backpackers, but then the dichotomy as compared to, it's quite nice geographically how it is so separated. It kind of works. I think that helps. But you've got a very rustic local village and that culture.
Yeah.
I think I'm just going to frame this question because it might kill 2 birds with one stone. How has it been to not just run a business and live yourself, but also raising kids, 2 boys, with that dichotomy of they're in a hostel where the 2-meter trans for one night Dutch people and there's partying and it's very multicultural mixed and they're going to private schools in England and then they're also living with kids who are speaking Cachuquel Mayan languages and whose mums are like kind of chicken. How is that to try to structure and parent and bring into the world two young boys?
Yeah, it's an interesting way of framing the conversation, looking at it through the viewpoint of the kids and being parents as well, because it is such an incredibly different culture here. You know, for anybody listening who doesn't know, there's 22 different languages in Guatemala. Or is it 24? 22, let's say, for argument's sake. And they speak Cachuquel here, and they're historically very geographically isolated as well.
I mean,
so even in comparison to other Cachuquel speaking places,
you go to San Marcos and they're like changing letters in here, let alone Chimaltenango, the capital, which like I get a textbook of Cachuquel, it's like
totally different. Hell? But also places like Chimaltenango and even San Marcos here on the lake have had vehicular access for years. Santa Cruz never had a road coming to it, so it was only accessible by boat. So the people here were dirt poor when we first arrived as well. There was malnutrition that you could see in just the facial structures, gaunt people who were just not eating well. And then, you know, we had girls at the beginning at the Iguana who would start working here, and within a couple of months of working here, you could just see that they looked so much healthier because they were eating while they were working, and they had access to good food in the kitchen. So we've seen massive changes in Santa Cruz here over the years, and we've been a part of them too. So we've been a part of that double-edged sort of changing a community, hopefully for the better, but also inviting in outside cultures that have then affected it and made it for the worse in some ways. You know, there's a loss of culture, but things like education, infant mortality rate, all sorts of things like that have gotten so much better here in Santa Cruz over the years. And then there's also that fine line of being respectful of the culture while doing something completely different down here, working in tourism, having people dress in drag on a Saturday night and running a bar, restaurant in a village where the locals just shouldn't drink as well because they've got a real intolerance for alcohol. I mean, even last night here in the bar, we saw a couple of local guys who were coming here drinking who just shouldn't have been
I ended up taking that guy up in a tuk-tuk.
Who were just like, you know, they rapidly have that, you know, that lack of the enzyme or whatever it is, and they have a real struggle with alcohol here. But we've tried to be respectful and helpful from a very early point on here in the village, and tried to, I mean, it was a neighbor of ours, Pat, who set up Amigos de Santa Cruz, the NGO here. We have always been supportive of them from the time that she started the organization back in the day. Deedle is now head of the board of that organization, and it's got a great big budget and it's doing all sorts of wonderful programs here in the village. Little things like we've always given all of our employees no interest loans anytime they need a loan to be able to build their house, as and when we can. We're not going to all of a sudden loan them $1 million quetzales to go do something, but, you know, as and when we can. We've always tried to pay them a fair wage, to make sure that even in like COVID, we didn't lay anybody off in COVID. We made sure that we kept all of our team, that we paid them throughout. We reduced their hours a bit, everybody, because nobody knew how long this was going to last. But, and we've tried to be very supportive, even though it is a very foreign culture. And the boys have seen that growing up. I think, you know, I love the sort of cartoon of the mother sitting on her phone on the bench with her kid on the phone and looking over at another parent who's reading and their kid is reading. And the woman goes, I don't know how you get your kids to read. And meanwhile, she's sitting there on her phone as well. I mean, kids copy their parents. Kids, you know, they see the way that we treat the locals. They see the way that we interact with the local population, and they've learned that respect for their culture growing up. But also they see how we interact with the foreigners at the Iguana and how we walk that line. And it has been, for the locals here in the village, having the presence of foreigners and having had a road come in recent years to the village, and having had electricity installed more and a raised standard of living, which means that they have televisions now in their houses and they can see more of the outside world. It's been what I've always called cultural whiplash in a way.
Wow. Oh my God, I've used that exact term from Dan Carlin. Do you listen to Dan Carlin?
Sorry?
Dan Carlin, Hardcore History?
Don't know it.
Oh, because he says that exact same term.
Oh, really?
It's one of my favorite terms.
I thought I invented it. Okay. Cultural whiplash, again, anyway.
You invented it in different places.
Parallel, but because I've seen families here in the village where the parents or the grandparents only spoke Quechical, had zero education, had no access to the outside world, and were doing subsistence farming growing up, basically. And now their grandchildren speak Spanish, or maybe even trying to learn some English, watch the television, are carrying around an iPhone, are constantly in contact with loads of people from the outside world. And it's just such an amazing shift that it is cultural whiplash in a way, and that can cause
100%.
strain.
It's almost like,
but it also, there were a
500
lot of
years.
things here that couldn't happen quick enough.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like nutrition, education, you know, do it now.
Yeah.
Don't wait and like wait years and years for it to happen. But some of those changes that did happen within, there are also some things that haven't really changed. There's still loads of misogyny here in the village. In a lot of the families, it's very deep rooted. That I would call it a 1950s attitude toward the woman's places in the home and things like that is still very much entrenched here. And there's a lot of pushback from it from a younger generation of women now who want education. They want a job. They want to make their own decisions. And that's great to see. And my wife especially is incredibly supportive of the efforts of young women's programs here in the village and things. But a lot of it still very much exists.
Right.
Even in younger guys here in the village, they'll get married and then, you know, they'll be like, well, my woman's place is to like have babies and make tortillas. And you're like, whoa, dude.
But you also see this even in our society, the modern society. If like from the 50s, it might not be from the 2000s to now, but even from the 50s now is quite quick. And women, it turns out, are just as, if not maybe more intelligent than guys. So if you put them in thing, but then there's the like kind of what's called hypergamy of like women tend to date across and up, at least in social status.
Yeah.
So then like women are getting better, and by getting better, they're like, it's not that it's a zero-sum game, but in relative terms, making men look worse than they actually were.
And that is true here in the village.
Right. And then it's like, so what, who do they then have kids with?
Exactly. I can think of a couple examples of exemplary families in the village that are fantastic, where the guy respects his wife. They've got a fantastic relationship. They have honest and open communication, equal value in the gender roles in their family. And you know, yes, the woman will make tortillas because she knows how to do so, because she was taught by her mother and things like that. But also the guy respects her, and she can have a job, and she can, you know, whatever. And it's very healthy. But a lot of the relationships here are not so healthy, and a lot of the women don't have a lot of options.
No, they have to
and
settle.
So some of the women have chosen to get pregnant by a guy and then leave him.
Is that,
or the guy is, you know, like there's a big drink problem here. You know, I've got a couple of different girls here at the Iguana who have got kids, and they love their kids to pieces. And they had those kids through a guy or two different guys. And then they chose to definitely not be with those guys because those guys were drunken pieces of shit. So, there are some very good guys up in the village, and there are some very good, solid families up in the village, but that definitely does exist here in Santa Cruz. And there's also been very interesting, I mean, there's been a brain drain from here as well in some ways, with so many people going north with the coyote up to the States. We're going to see how that all plays out with Trump and his deportations.
sending him back, yeah.
If he starts sending lots of people back, is it going to change the dynamic of the profile of the people that are here in Santa Cruz? Are we going to get some bilingual people that are coming back from up north in
That'd
here?
be interesting, eh?
You know, I'll feel sorry for them that they can't be making the money that they were making up there anymore. But yeah, I think it might change the dynamics of a lot of the
That's an
communities
interesting
down here.
take for the people, the leftist troopers in the US who are screaming and shouting about what Trump's doing. There's maybe an argument, certainly one that I haven't actually heard in that space, of, but what about the places they left? Are they going to go back and make them better? That's wild.
You would hope, but you would also, I mean, also very disturbingly, is like defunding USAID and development programs and things like that here in Guatemala. They desperately need to be funded. You can't kick everybody out and make their countries worse and then expect nobody to try to be coming north. The idea that previous administrations maybe have had is, yes, try to put tighter reins on immigration, but also try to help those countries through economic aid and stuff like that, so that the people don't want to leave, so that there are things for them to do and economic empowerment in their communities and things like that to keep them from trying to go north. But you can't hit them with both edge of the sword and be like, get out and I'm going to screw your country over.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And I hope that a lot of these stupid things that are happening in the early days are pushing the boundaries, and we can come back to something that's a little bit more. There doesn't need to be immigration reform, but it doesn't need to be in a mean way. You know, I mean, and they should frankly issue a shit ton more visas for agricultural workers, because agricultural workers have been coming up north from Guatemala, from Mexico, from all over Central America to the States for 100 years. It's not like a recent thing that they've just been coming up. I mean, my parents remember being in Idaho back when they were growing up and having Mexican farmers come up and harvest the apples in their area back in the 19...
For a season and then
You
go
know,
back.
and then, yeah, they would come up for the season, harvest the apples, and then they'd go back down to Mexico.
Buy their concrete bags and like.
And they were great. They were great relations. If you can find a great video online of even back in the 1980s, George Bush Sr. debating Ronald Reagan, two members of the Republican Party who were both fighting for the Republican ticket back then. Somebody in the audience asked the question like, well, what do you think about healthcare for migrant farm workers? There's this great YouTube video that you can find. Yeah. And they're both like, our proud Mexican neighbors down south, and they're such good people. We need to figure out a way that they can be here and that they can get healthcare while they're here. Neither of them answer the question because they're politicians. Sure. But both of them were just like so complimentary about the Mexican people and about what lovely people they are and things like that. And you're like, wow, this was the Republican Party back then in the mid 80s. And then you fast forward like, you know, 40 years down the line and you're like, what happened? You know, it's like racial insults and fear. And
I saw a Rogan bit and he's like, the idea that like Mexicans are lazy and stuff is the biggest bullshit. Like, they're working everywhere and they're the hardest workers.
Exactly. They're rapists. They're, you know, whatever. It's like, dude, you know, creating fear, creating division is not what we need in the world these days. You know, I get it that you have to have, every country feels like they have to have their, you know, their immigration a little bit under control. It's happening in Europe right now too. I mean, there's been too much immigration in some countries, and too much immigration leads to racism at the end of the day. A healthy amount of immigration allows some people to come in, integrate in the society a little bit. Too much all of a sudden leads to immigration, leads to racism, which leads to voting in right-wing people, which leads to isolation.
And it would happen in the reverse as well. If suddenly like there were 20 iguanas and up in the town and stuff and all the Dutch people in the transvestite dresses, I think the Santa Cruz locals would probably be like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah.
Try to kick us out, you know?
A little more resentment. That's why we've always tried to... And in a way, like you said, you know, I didn't educate my kids here in the local school. You know, we always educated our kids over in Panajachel in the other village, because being here, being respectful of the people, being respectful of their culture is all good and fine. But when it comes time for me to educate my kids, I want to make sure my kids get a good education. And I'm sorry, but the Guatemalan Ministry of Education has actively worked against education in the past. We have set up, you know, I was head of the board of one school in Pana. My wife was head of the board of the other school in Pana at one point. She set up a school in Pana. She's now setting up a school here in Santa Cruz. We've had loads of dealings with the Ministry of Education over the years. And anybody who you meet in Guatemala who is educated, who is motivated, and who has made a success of their lives, give them a pat on the back, because they have done it against all odds. They have had to figure out a way to do it despite. You know, not because of, but despite the authorities in the country that are not funding and not helping. They haven't put money into teacher training. They haven't put money into facilities, buildings, infrastructures, books. Nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it's even though we're a part of the culture, I've always wanted better for my kids than. Like, I wasn't going to put my kids in a local school here up in the village. It was, you know, education prevention in a way. So we've tried to, but we knew that we didn't have the energy and the wherewithal and the time in our day doing a business like we do to be able to homeschool them as well, because that just takes a lot. But luckily, there's a good international school in Pana. They grew up in schools in Pana until they were 13, 14 years old, and then realized that they wanted more. They'd traveled to the States, they'd traveled to the UK, they'd seen what there was out there. And so we made the very tough decision then to board them in the UK, which we thought we'd never be able to even afford to do. It was never even an option. And luckily, with a few really good years in tourism here, we were able to put aside a little bit of a fund to try to educate the kids. But yeah, that was a great big shift when the kids were all of a sudden, you know, we thought we would have them here until they were 18 or so. and then all of a sudden to have them gone and have us be empty nesters here is a big
Right.
it's a big shift in anyone's life.
For sure. I've had like conversations with Deedle about that. It's like, oh, it's okay. So what's now? What are we doing now? Like, you know, it's
And
like,
we're still adjusting to it, really.
yeah.
Because, I mean, it is, and a lot of it just means we're traveling a lot more. Which is, you know, we've always got that guilt of carbon footprint as well, of getting on so many planes. But, you know, I mean, her mother is still with us and she's getting older in the UK. My parents are getting older up in the States and I want to go and visit them and help take care of them. Because we didn't run to a foreign country because we didn't get along with our families. I mean, a lot of people do. They're like, you know, be like, fuck you, I'm moving to the other side of the world. We actually love our parents dearly and our families, and we love it when they come and visit us here, and we like to go and visit them there as well. Our parents are too old to come and visit us here now, so now it's our turn to go and try to help be taking care of them. The kids wanted more opportunity than Santa Cruz La Laguna has got to give them. So one of them's in university in the UK right now. The other one's working over there. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a jumping on planes every now and then, a few times a year existence that we've got now. But the boys have had a very multicultural upbringing. And any of the other foreign-born kids who I know who were born here on the lake, almost to a kid, are just very different, very special kids. They've got like an empathy and a lack of ageism as well. Like there'll be kids who are 20 playing kids with kids that are 10, you know, and then they'll all get together years down the line. If one of them's in Switzerland and one of them's in Argentina, they'll still be chatting with each other, having grown up here on the lake. They'll maybe try to get together while they're back here on the lake in the holidays. And they've got that common bond of being, you know, kids of foreign parents who were raised in a cool place. They're all bilingual, at least some of them trilingual if they learned Quechua when they were growing up here as well, or if they had, you know, I've got
French or
my kids had friends who had a French mother, French father, an American mother, one had an Argentinian dad, and then they were being raised here as well. So they had, you know, French, English, Spanish, and Quechua. And they're living around Europe now, and they're living in the States now, and they come back for the holidays, and it's just great to see them all get together. But they're just generally cool kids that have just had a very interesting upbringing and have learned to interact. I mean, my kids grew up in a hotel, so they learned to interact with adults at a very young age as well. They could walk right into an adult conversation and be like, hi, stick out their hand, hi, I'm Theo, nice to meet you. And people would be looking at them like, you're weird. Why are you a kid and you're introducing yourself to me? And, you know, or they'd come straight up in Spanish. And there was one very funny time when we were at the animal market in San Francisco El Alto, because somebody had given us a pig at a joke one time, but then we decided it was a really cool thing to have a pig here to eat the vegetable waste from the restaurant, and that we could then butcher the pig down the line. Sorry, vegetarians, plug your ears, and provide fresh home-raised pork for the restaurant off of the extra vegetable scrapings and stuff. And so for the last several years, we've had pigs here. My wife thought it would be great fun if we could actually try to breed pigs one time. So we're looking for a male pig that still had its balls. And I'm with both of my two young blonde boys, and we're in San Francisco El Alto, which is by
middle of nowhere,
Cuatro Caminos, on the way to Shela, in this village in the middle of nowhere. Pretty good wind going to there. And my boys are walking up in fluent Spanish to these local indigenous people in the market going, excuse me, miss, does your pig have its balls? We're looking for a pig with balls. And there was some videographer guy who was there who was like, this is a gold mine. Can I interview you and your family again? And I was up there with my boys. Like, here they are, this weird family who's like a mix of English and the States, and they live here in Guatemala, and they're looking for a pig with balls. And this guy, I think, got back in touch with his producers and was just like, you're never going to believe the footage I got. But yeah, they love coming back here, my kids. I hope that life will bring them back here, but you got to set them free when they're young and figure out what it is that they want to do. But this is always going to be home to them, and they absolutely love coming back here. In their heart of hearts, they definitely consider this to be home, no matter where they roam. And we're not going anywhere anytime soon because we've dug some pretty damn big, deep roots here as well.
Sure.
It's not something we can really just walk away from. And even though we have thought of walking away from it several times over the years, been like, well, what are we doing? Where should we be living? Then we look at the quality of life that we've got here, and it's pretty damn good. Although I don't know if I can keep doing the tourism thing and the, the being on stage thing for the rest of my life. My wife's still definitely got the energy to do it. I think it's going to be a question of, paying more money to have more managers and more people do more of the legwork, while we can step in and step out a lot more and still own the place and run it.
Yeah,
and
maybe going away for
eventually,
a few
if
months
the
at a
kids
time.
want to do it, we'd love to. We've still got stuff on our bucket list. In our hearts, we're still backpackers as well, and we want to go and see some more of the world that we haven't seen. So, and that would mean leaving here for a little while.
I heard you've never come to Australia, having never equalised upside down.
Us where?
Yeah.
Oh, the other place with the reef that you talked about.
Exactly,
Yeah, it's
that
apparently
one.
bigger.
Yeah,
A little bit bigger?
Just a tad, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe do that one day. We've got we've had the privilege over the years too of having met so many cool people who've been volunteers at the Iguana, who've come through, who've been from all over the world. So if and when we do make it down under, we've got friends in Sydney, we've got friends in Australia, all over the place in Melbourne. We got friends here and there that we definitely would love to go and see down there. And Deedle's desperate to get back to Indonesia someday.
Oh yeah, no.
We want to go and do more diving. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the coming years, because you can keep wanting this stuff, and if you wait until you're 80 to go and do it, and you physically can't do it anymore, that's a bit of a bummer, isn't it?
Crazy, yeah.
So we really want to try to figure out a way where we can get away too. But for the time being, especially while Gabriel's still in university as well, we want to make sure that we're still here, a base for him during the holidays and things like that for them, so that they can come home. And especially because he's in Newcastle, freezing his tits off right now. And so, and I'm here, Gabriel. So if you can see this video, Gabriel, guess what, dude? I win.
Phil makes a surprise appearance.
Exactly.
Man, I think I'm all out of questions. Do you have, just such a cliche thing to end on, but do you have maybe to you specifically, when you were my age, like 23, 24, maybe you're just out of uni and you had that 5 years ahead of you where you were trying to figure it out in physical locations or metaphorical places in society. Is there anything that you could say now? Obviously, you had to have that journey, right? But is there anything that would have been helpful for you to have heard and genuinely listened to back then?
I suppose to not worry so much about the destination, to enjoy the journey more, because I was always thinking, am I doing the right thing? Where is this leading to? Is this going to am I going to have a career? Am I going to have I've always wanted to have at least financial security. I've never been super comfortable being a totally broke backpacker. I always want to make sure I've got, the ability to go back and make a little bit more money or do things to keep the adventures going. But to enjoy the journey instead of worrying about the destination, I suppose. And to wear sunscreen and, say no to a couple drinks at the bar every now and then.
I'm okay at the no to drinks. I'm bad at the sunscreen.
But it's difficult you're doing it in a different age than I did it in as well. There's now, it's an even more globalized planet now, and it's a more explored planet as well. And it's doing. I remember being a certain age, and there was some great movie. There was a movie years ago, and this guy, it was Jean Cusack was the character. I think it was called Say Anything. It was a movie back in the 80s, and this guy is talking to his girlfriend's father, and the father's like, "Well, what do you want to do with your life, son?" And he's like, "Well, I don't want to buy anything sold or processed, and I don't want to sell anything bought or processed, and I don't want to process anything bought or sold." And I was just like, I felt like I was like that at that age too. That really hit with me, where I was just like, I know all this stuff that I don't want to do. I don't want to be a cog in the wheel. I don't want to just be in some boring office job someplace. I knew all the stuff I didn't want to do. And luckily I found something I did want to do and that I felt good about doing as well. Working in tourism, I feel like we're not harming, do no harm kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, we might be, we may have harmed the Santa Cruz culture over the years in some ways by coming and putting our own foreign footprint on it. But I hope that we've helped as well. But you have to make their own decisions about what they're comfortable with, and don't settle for less than you want. I feel like we've only got one trip around this world, and I want to suck the marrow out of life and just get the most out of it that I can, while not being an asshole at the same time. And I feel like we've done a pretty good job of that so far, but it's not the end yet.
Hell yeah. sucking the marrow out of life.
Hey, amen.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Good fun.
That was great.
Yeah. You're good at this, man. You got to do more of it.
No, I plan to.
And you get Deedle next time.